Story 1. Caught my unemployed son installing hidden cameras in my room. Turns out my ex-wife convinced him to spy on me, accusing me of cheating and favoring my daughter over my son. I, 46M, have 2 kids, my son who we'll call Neil, and my daughter Natasha. Neil is 22 and Natasha just turned 18. My ex-wife and I have been divorced ever since Natasha was born. We have been co-parenting them and it's been really great for the most part. We got married really young and soon enough we had realized that we made a mistake, so we decided to get divorced because we were just not compatible at the time. I was young and stupid and so was she. After trying for a really long time, we decided to separate and that was the end of our marriage. But we continued to co-parent our kids together. By the time we found out that she was pregnant with Natasha, we had already started the divorce proceedings, so it was too late to back out then, and we decided to just share custody. We recently reconnected about a couple of months ago. After a lot of relationships, both of us have grown up a lot and we decided that we were going to give our relationship another shot this time and try to make it work. We had been great friends for the past few years, so now we felt like it was the right time to make the leap. Our kids were also grown up and they would understand, so no time was better than now. We don't live together yet, but we have been discussing the idea of moving together in a couple of weeks or maybe months. My ex-wife, 45F, and I have always loved them both equally and tried our best never to play favorites. At least she claims that she did, but everybody knows for a fact that Neil was always her favorite. She never treated Natasha badly, but I could tell that she had a soft corner for her son and I was okay with it as long as she never treated our daughter badly. I love Neil, he's my kid, so of course I would do anything for him, but he's kind of an idiot. He always has been that way and I don't know. I guess I used to be disappointed whenever he would do something stupid. He was not very good at school and would often flunk out of really easy classes. He was also not very good at sports and that was a huge bummer for me, and for a long time I was really worried about him because I had no idea what he was going to do in the future. I kept trying to push him into working harder and doing better, but he just didn't seem interested and he just had a really laid-back attitude towards life. It also didn't help that my ex-wife kept coddling him. She would defend him no matter what and constantly tell me that he would find his path even if it happened late. He got into community college because he didn't get accepted anywhere else since his grades were really low, and I told him that I wanted him to work hard because in spite of what his mother said, the world was a difficult place to survive in and without hard work he would never get anywhere. I thought it was good advice and let's be real, the kid really needed to hear it. But my ex-wife would always accuse me of pushing him too hard and making him nervous, which is why he was never able to succeed. But I thought that my ex-wife telling Neil that everything would be fine even if he didn't do anything to achieve it was what was ruining his life. We would constantly have fights about how to raise Neil and what to do about his situation. That was pretty much the only major bone of contention between the two of us because we could never bring ourselves to agree on how to raise a child like that. In my opinion, Neil was just plain lazy and my ex-wife would unintentionally encourage it. I had faith in him, I knew that he was capable of doing better, but he was just not driven or focused enough to do it. Anyway, the point was that I loved Neil because of course he is my kid. Coming to Natasha, she was different and we didn't really have to do much for her. She was the polar opposite of her brother and was good at everything that she did. She wasn't a genius or anything of the sort, but she was kind of a jack of all trades. She never gave us the run around as Neil did, and needless to say parenting Natasha was much easier than being a parent to Neil. She got accepted into her school of choice recently, and we were all really happy for her. At the same time, we were kind of upset for Neil because he was recently just laid off a couple of months ago. My ex-wife had spoke into a friend of hers and managed to get a job for Neil in her business. He was supposed to work in HR since he was good with people and had seemed like a relatively straightforward and easy task. He was doing great, but unfortunately he had to be let go because my ex-wife's friend's business wasn't going too great and they were struggling to stay afloat financially, so they had to let go of a lot of employees and Neil happened to be one of them. It was a huge letdown for me personally because from what I had heard Neil was doing great and I believed that he finally had a shot at having a good future, but now I was back to worrying about him because he was unemployed and I didn't know what he was going to do. We received the news just a few weeks ago and my ex-wife insisted that I asked him to come back home and live with so he could save money on rent and other expenses. I thought that it was kind of unnecessary because Neil was a fully grown adult and he hadn't said that he wanted to come back home, so I didn't understand why my ex-wife wanted to insist that I asked him to return. Getting hired and getting fired was all a part of life, and he had to learn to get back on his feet after being let down once again. My ex-wife was trying to make things easier for him, but eventually it would just prove to be difficult for him in the long run. I knew for a fact that if I allowed Neil to come back home, he would have absolutely no drive to start looking for another job because he would know that he had us to fall back on. I don't mean to sound like a bad father, but like I said, he's not very ambitious, and if the kid has an easy way out of something, then he will take that way out instead of working hard and doing the right thing. I argued with my ex-wife for a really long time about this, and I put up a good fight, but she told me that our duty was to protect him from the world because it was harsh enough as it is. He didn't need to be taught a lesson by us as well. We just needed to be there for him and teach him that he could count on us, and I couldn't argue with that logic. It was pretty spot on. She said that she would have offered to let him live in her apartment, but her lease would be over in a couple of weeks, and we had been planning that she would be moving in with me anyway. It would be kind of pointless for him to move in with her just for a few weeks, so I ended up contacting Neil a little after we had received the news of him being laid off. I asked him to come back home so that he could save on rent, and he readily agreed, a little too happily if I may say so. Anyway, when he moved back, I told him very clearly that this was going to be a temporary arrangement until he was back on his feet and had been able to find a new job. I was very clear about my conditions and said that I was not going to allow my fully grown-up son to live with us for the rest of his life. That was just not going to happen, and he had to be prepared for it, so if he was thinking about making this a permanent arrangement, he could just forget about it. I had already spoken about this with my ex-wife, and even though she wasn't on board with it, she realized that it was important for him to be self-reliant and independent, so she agreed to let me tell him that. And Neil said that he was fine with it. I told him that he could live with us, but he would have to continue applying for jobs, and as soon as he got his first paycheck, he would have to start looking for a new apartment. He agreed to all of that, and I was very relieved because I thought that I could bring him back on track. But unfortunately, what happened in the end was exactly what I had feared would happen. He was busy for the first couple of days looking for jobs online, and I was really proud of him. However, a couple of days later, I realized that he had stopped looking, and every time I would come back home from work, he would just be lying on the couch and either be scrolling on his phone or playing some stupid little video game. Whenever I would ask him about how his job search was going, he would always have the same vague answer and tell me that he was looking for things, but there was a recession going on, and so not many businesses were hiring at the time. Even if I would ask him to start small and then work his way up, he would tell me that it was pointless and he didn't want to start in a low position because it was beneath him. It was really ironic how working in a low-paying position was beneath him, but being unemployed and relying on your parents wasn't. I would try to have discussions with him about work and was even willing to spend my free time at home helping him out with his job search, but my ex-wife didn't like it. She kept telling me that I was pressuring him and that no good was going to come out of it. My ex-wife believed that I should just let him be and he would figure it out on his own eventually, and that was the most frustrating thing that she would say to me because I knew for a fact that if I didn't push him, he would never figure it out on his own. The reason for that was not because he was incapable or incompetent. It was just because he was plain old lazy. There was nothing else to it. I kept trying to talk to him, but my ex-wife would stop me every single night when we were on calls, and we were back to our old routine of fighting about what to do about Neil, which was ridiculous because this was a full-grown adult man we were talking about. I hated the fact that we were still fighting about the same things that we used to fight about when he was in middle school. It just made me feel like this kid was never going to grow up and we would be raising him for the rest of our lives. So needless to say, my ex-wife and I had been fighting over this for quite some time now. But that doesn't mean that we didn't love each other. I always have and I always will, and that's probably why I'm still trying to make this work and questioning myself. Anyway, last week we threw Natasha a party. She had been accepted into the college of her choice and would be going away in a couple of months. We did up the house really nicely, invited all our friends and family, and just planned on having a nice time in general. My ex-wife and I had been fighting a lot, so this was a nice PA for us. Neil was the only person who didn't seem too happy that day, but I thought that was natural because even though nobody said it, everybody was thinking the same thing. He was obviously going through a rough patch, and to see his little sister succeed in ways that he had never been able to and be celebrated like this was bound to hurt. Don't get me wrong, we did celebrate his achievement when he was in school as well, but that was just to encourage him and boost his morale because the things that we would celebrate for him but not real achievements. For instance, the ones actually threw him a party for not failing a subject that he had been flunking forever. That's how low the standards had been for him in comparison to that Natasha being celebrated for getting into the college of her choice seemed like a really big deal, and it actually was. Strangely enough, my ex-wife didn't seem to notice that Neil was feeling a little down that day, but I did take note of it, and when nobody was looking I decided to sit with him for a while and tell him that it would all be fine soon enough. All I had to do was keep pushing and working hard, and life would find a way to make things better for him. We had a nice conversation that day, and he was actually responding to me in the things that I was telling him. I thought that I had made some progress with him that day, and he was going to buckle up and start looking for jobs the next day onwards. I was stupid enough to believe that that conversation would actually lead somewhere. The next day, however, something insane happened and I ended up kicking Neil out of our house. I had left for work as usual that day, but I decided to take the rest of the day off around noon because I was feeling a little under the weather and I could feel a cold coming on. So I started driving back home, and I expected Neil to be working in the living room or something. But when I came back home, I rang the doorbell several times, but nobody answered. Natasha was out with her friend Soil, was the only one who was supposed to be at home that day, but I kept ringing the doorbell and nobody came to the door. After a while, I got tired of ringing the doorbell, so I decided to use the spare keys that we keep under the flower pots to unlock the door and enter the house on my own. I was also kind of worried that Neil might have injured himself for something, which is why he hadn't been able to come to the road. I was really worried, and when I entered the house I checked every room. The last room that I checked was my office, and that's where I found Neil. He had his headphones on and they were noise-canceling, so he hadn't been able to hear me. When I entered the room he had his back turned to me and he was working with some tools in a corner of my room. I had no idea what he was doing, but when I took a closer look I saw something like a camera lying on my table. I instantly put two and two together, and I was infuriated because there was literally no reason for him to be installing hidden cameras in my room. I asked him what he thought he was doing, clearly very pissed off, so he didn't tell me anything. He said that he was sorry about this, but apparently he had too. I had no idea what he was talking about because it didn't make sense, and I couldn't imagine any circumstances under which he would absolutely have to install hidden cameras in my office. I asked him if he had installed them in any other rooms, and he said that he hadn't, but I checked for myself just to be sure. I didn't know what he was up to, but once I was done checking all the rooms I came back to him, and I told him that he better have a good explanation for all of this because this was a serious offense and I wasn't going to tolerate it. Instead of explaining to me why he was doing all this, he just stood silently and refused to talk to me. I think it's his silence that really pissed me off, and I completely lost it because the fact that you didn't even have an answer was just crazy. I started telling at him about everything, about laziness and lack of ambition and how I had been worried sick about him all this while. But in spite of our little chat the previous day, he was still doing weird and unnecessary crap, and the worst part was that he didn't even have an explanation for it. He took it all without a word, and even when I kept demanding that he answer me, he didn't say anything. I was getting really agitated, so after a point I decided to tell him that he was no longer welcome to stay here with me, and he could gather all his stuff and leave because there was no way that I could allow him to live here with me after what I had just caught him doing. He tried to fight with me, but I told him that I wasn't going to let him live with me, at least until he could give me a satisfactory explanation as to what he was doing and why. So we argued back and forth for a while, but eventually he just decided to leave and started packing his bags. I was really disappointed because I had honestly believed that the previous day we had actually had a productive discussion and he would try to improve his life, but instead of that he was doing God knows what. After he left, I decided to nap for a while because I was already really feeling under the weather before I came back home, and the fight with my son had also made me feel exhausted. I woke up in the evening because my phone was ringing and it was my ex-wife calling. When I answered the call, she didn't even wait for a second before completely tearing into me and saying that she couldn't believe that I had kicked Neil out. It took me a couple of seconds to really wake up and process everything, but she was yelling at me nonstop, and it was clear that she was very upset about this whole thing. I explained to her the reason why ID kicked him out, and I expected her to be just as mad and confused as I had been, but instead she was all like, "So what?" That caught me off guard because it was surely not the reaction that I had expected. So I told her that install hidden cameras in my room without my consent was a huge breach of my privacy, and he didn't even have a good explanation as to why he was doing it, so I had to kick him out. I thought my explanation was pretty logical and reasonable, but she was just not willing to admit it. She kept fighting with me baselessly, and it was getting on my nerves because it felt like she was going to go to any lengths to defend Neil, and a couple of seconds later I found out why. Apparently she was the one who had put him up to this and asked him to install cameras in my house. Her reasoning was that she had seen me act really close with a female coworker of mine who also happened to be a really good friend at the party that I had thrown Natasha the other day, and so before she moved in and ended the lease on her apartment she wanted to make sure that I was loyal to her and nobody else. She claimed that she had been cheated on in the past, which is why she was a little insecure about these things, so she was the one who had convinced Neil to go buy the cameras and then installed them himself. I was shocked that she could even think of such a thing, and I told her that what she had done was truly disgusting. But instead of accepting her mistake, she started trying to shift the blame onto me somehow. She said that I was the one who had never made her feel secure in our relationship even when we were married earlier. I thought that it was an unfair thing to bring up because when we were married for the first time we were both really young and were just not ready to be married. The only reason we even got hitched was because she was pregnant with Neil, and I thought that was something that both of us agreed on, that we had gotten married because of Neil and not because we were actually ready for marriage. But when I brought that up she said that she always knew that this was the reason I had a grudge against Neil right from when he was born, because apparently I treated him differently from Natasha and constantly vilified him. She accused me of hitting Neil just because he was the reason we had to get married, and apparently I thought that had ruined my life. Let me just make it clear, I don't regret my marriage and we had a good run, but we went out of steam because we were just not ready mentally. That doesn't mean that I regret it, and I certainly don't think that it ruined my life, and as for Neil, I think I've mentioned multiple times that I really love that kid because he is my son. I wouldn't have it any other way, but let's be real, he is not the sharpest tool in the shed, and I have to be honest with him to make sure that he doesn't screw up his own future. If anything, I'm the one doing him a favor, while my ex-wife does nothing but put him on a pedestal and tell him that he's perfect the way he is, which will never get him anywhere. But instead of acknowledging that, my ex-wife started gaslighting me and manipulating the facts to make it seem like I was playing favorites between Neil and Natasha. I was really confused about that conversation because I thought we were supposed to be discussing why exactly she had found it necessary to install hidden cameras in my room instead of just talking to me like a normal person and finding out my equation with the female coworker. It's not like we were strangers, we had known each other for a really long time and we had even been married before. I felt like I deserved the benefit of the doubt because yeah, I might have a lot of drawbacks, but I'm not a cheater and she should know that. I tried to talk to her, but she was just too emotional and kept saying nonsensical things like I only dislike Neil because he was the reason I had to get married to her, and she couldn't believe that she was being cheated on yet again. She was all over the place, and it was clear that there was no talking to her at that point in time because she wasn't thinking straight. So I told her that she could calm down a little and then I would call her back because I didn't want to make matters worse than they were. So I hung up that day, and after that I tried to call her back several times, but she didn't answer my calls. When Natasha came back home, I told her everything except for the part where my ex-wife had said that she was afraid that I had been cheating on her because I didn't think it was appropriate to tell my 18-year-old daughter. But I did tell her that Neil had been installing cameras in my room to spy on me, and I told her that I didn't know the reasons yet, but I said that if her mother got in touch with her, then she was to tell me about it. She seemed to understand that there was something going on here that I wasn't telling her, and she respected that and didn't ask further questions. But unfortunately, my ex-wife has not gotten in touch with either my daughter or me. I really want things to go back to normal, but I don't want to apologize for anything because I think I reacted perfectly normally. Anybody in my position would have done the same thing, considering the fact that Neil wasn't even telling me the reason why he had been installing cameras in my room. I understand now that it was to protect his mother, but even then I think my reaction was completely reasonable and it shouldn't be held against me. I also don't know how to feel about my ex-wife accusing me of playing favorites between Neil and Natasha because I don't look at it that way. I think I've been more than fair to both of them. I don't understand why she wants to make me the villain here, but I feel bad about everything. I also want to make things work with her because she's probably the only person that I've actually ever loved, and I don't want to let it go. I'm just really confused and I have no idea what to do about this. A couple of days have passed and I'm still having really conflicted feelings about everything. Aita for kicking my son out of the house when I found him installing hidden cameras in my room. Update 1. So I know most of you advised me to break up with my ex-wife and end the relationship for good, but I couldn't bring myself to do that. I'm sorry, but I really love her and I don't think I can just let it go. I paid her to visit a couple of days ago and decided to speak to her in person because she hadn't been answering any of my calls or responding to my texts. That is the only option that I have left now. Thankfully, Neil wasn't at home at the time because apparently he had a job interview, but my ex-wife was at home, and even though she was quite hesitant and awkward, she did let me in, and we had a discussion about everything. She told me that her boyfriend had been cheating on her with one of her friends, and that had really left a mark. So when she saw me laughing it up and having a great time with my coworker at the party, her brain went into overdrive, and the next thing she was asking Neil to help her spy on me. She confessed that maybe she was not recovering from her last breakup as well as she had thought she was. So we decided to put our relationship on hold for a while, so she could go back to therapy and try to work on her feelings. I don't know how long it's going to take for her to get back to normal, but I'm ready to wait. She also apologized to me for everything that she said the other day, and we hugged and made up. It was quite emotional but necessary, and I'm glad that I talked to her. We have agreed that we are not breaking up, but we're just taking a little break, and when she feels better, we're just going to pick up right where we left off. I also waited for Neil to come home that day, and I reconciled with him as well. I told him that I was proud of him and that I loved him even if I didn't say it enough and always seemed to be pushing him to do better. So that was that. I don't know what's going to happen now, but I'm hoping that it's all for the best. Update 2. Hi, so a couple of months have passed since the last update, and Neil finally has a job in his own apartment again. I couldn't be happier for the kid, honestly. Natasha has also left for college, and it seems to me like both of them are doing great now. My ex-wife and I are still on a break, but I'm doing a lot better emotionally now. Even if we don't get back together, I think I'll be okay with it, but we're going to try to stay on good terms because we want to be actively involved in our kids' lives since we recently met at Neil's housewarming party and also dropped Natasha off at college together, so it's necessary for us to be on good terms for their sake. Update 3. Hey, so you guys must have forgotten about me, and I wouldn't even blame you guys for it because it's almost been 3 years since I last posted here. I know I had definitely forgotten about this thread, but I'm back now with just one tiny little update. A couple of weeks ago, my ex-wife and I got remarried, and I think it was the best decision of my life. Our kids were there, they were happy, and so were we. That's all that a man needs. She has been through therapy and is doing much better now, so we reconciled about a year ago, and after living together for almost a year, we decided to get married again and have a small and intimate ceremony among our closest friends and family. It was beautiful, and life is great right now, which I'm really grateful for. Feels nice to know that I've come such a long way. Now on to the next story. Story 2. Before we start, if you're enjoying this video so far, please consider liking and subscribing to the channel. Now let's continue. Jealous stepdaughter secretly fed me peanuts on her honeymoon, sending me to the ER. Now she's freaking out and threatening to quit college after her dad cut her off for the cruel prank. So I, 44F, got married last month to my boyfriend of 4 years, Jeff, 48M. He also has a daughter from a previous marriage, Addison, 18F. I don't know why, but for some reason, Addison has never liked me. Jeff and I started dating about 4 years ago since we had a couple of common friends, and they thought that it would be nice to set us up. I had also been married before, but I did not have any kids. My divorce was finalized 5 years ago, and it was not really a bad divorce as such. My ex-husband and I just realized that we had fallen out of love and were more like friends rather than partners. So we decided to mutually part ways, and that's how that marriage ended. So we did not end on bad terms, but we are not friends anymore. We have not kept in touch. Jeff was also married before, as I had mentioned above, but unfortunately, his wife passed away 7 years after Addison was born. Jeff had had a couple of girlfriends after that, but nothing too serious. So both of us had been single for a really long time, and our common friends decided to set us up, which we are really thankful for because it turned out to be the best decision of our lives, and I have never had any relationship issues, only the mundane stuff. We get along really well, he understands me, and I really understand him. The only thing that I would say was a bit of a problem in our relationship was his daughter. I did not have a problem with her, just to be clear, but I always just got this vibe from her that she did not like me, and she believed that her father was too good for me, which I don't think is a bad thing. It just means that she thinks highly of her father, and that's the way that it should be. But then acting like I'm not good enough for her father and constantly giving me weird looks or trying to be all snide around me and making me feel weird about myself. I don't know if it's the right way to go about appreciating her father. I did bring it up a couple of times with Jeff at the beginning of our relationship, and I asked him if she was this way around all of his previous girlfriends, and just as I had expected, he told me that this is how she usually behaved whenever he brought home another woman. He had been trying to talk to her and get her to stop behaving that way with his partners since no woman appreciated this, and it would lead to a lot of fights, but eventually he would always choose his daughter because that's his family, so it would almost always result in a breakup, and he seemed pretty frustrated with it. But he told me that he couldn't help the situation, and this is how it was since she just refused to change and grow up. She had lost her mother when she was 7 years old, and can be really tough for a child. So I decided to be a little compassionate towards her and ignore the way that she would behave with me. She could behave as badly as she wanted to get to me. I had made up my mind about it, and I really like Jeff, so it was easy for me to ignore her weird behavior. Besides, when I started dating Jeff, she was already 14. I knew that the teenage years could be a weird phase for kids, and she was going through puberty, so it was quite natural for her to act like a brat. I did not have any kids of my own, but I had heard stories, and I knew that eventually she would grow up and change, at least that's what I had expected. I was not about to get into drama with a 14-year-old, so I just continued to ignore her behavior. Then last year she went away to college, and by that time she had already started changing her behavior. She did not give me any weird looks anymore, and neither did she try to put me down. But I guess we had come to an unspoken agreement after 2 years of being together in some sort of way, and she had realized that she would not be able to drive me away like she had driven away all the other women who had been involved with Jeff before me. So she had given up trying to do so, and we came to a place of mutual respect, and she stopped picking on me, and I remained unaffected. Jeff proposed to me after she went away to college, and shortly after that we got married. It was a very small and intimate ceremony, and obviously Addison was also present. I had expected her to be upset, or at least a little put off, but she seemed quite okay with everything, so for that reason, her behavior at the wedding, I assumed that maybe she was finally coming around and warming up to me since she had been reasonably nice to me at the wedding. I guess I should have said my standard tire, and not fallen for any of that BS because that really cost me. I had started to believe that maybe she was coming around, and so when she asked me if she could accompany us on our honeymoon, I ended up agreeing to it after giving it a little bit of thought and discussing it with Jeff, who also seemed to be on board with the idea. But there's a lot of context for that as well. I'm not a total idiot who allowed my adult stepdaughter, who hates me, to accompany me on my honeymoon. So Jeff and I had decided that we were going to go to Egypt for our honeymoon since that's where one of our favorite novels was based. And it's also a generally beautiful place. And Addison wanted to accompany us because she is a history major, and Egypt would be the perfect place for her, and we sort of agreed with that. It has a really rich history and beautiful culture, so we did not want to deprive her of that, and we agreed to let her tag along. She had asked us if she could accompany us 3 weeks before we were supposed to leave, and it took us 1 week to come to a decision about it. After we told her that we were okay with her coming along with us, she was really happy, and I was the one who broke the news to her, so she seemed really thankful to me. I will not lie, I was actually looking forward to bonding with her on the trip because I thought that it was about time that we put aside our differences from the past and started fresh, and I was planning on bringing that up during the trip at some point, and then we would all have a really great time together because now Jeff and I are going to be together for the rest of our lives, and I don't want to have any sort of unresolved issues with my stepdaughter. She was still in college since she had missed some classes, but she had come back home for the wedding and did not want to miss more since she was also leaving to accompany us on the honeymoon, and it would be another week or so, and only came back home on the day of our flight. The day that she came back home, she arrived about 3 hours before we were supposed to leave for the airport, and everything was pretty rushed, so I did not really get time to speak to her properly or interact with her much. We were all in a rush, and all of us really cared about just getting out of the flight and landing safely and doing everything on time. I did not notice anything off about her behavior, and there was absolutely no way I would have been able to predict what was going to happen once we landed. Everything went really smoothly while we were departing, and even on the flight, things were pretty smooth. Once we landed at the airport in Egypt, we took a cab and we went to the hotel. We were pretty tired, and especially Addison, since she had traveled the entire day, so all of us decided that we had better get some rest after the long flight, and in the evening we would go out. We had decided early on that we would stay at the same hotel, but Addison would have a different room on a different floor so that Jeff and I would get to properly enjoy our honeymoon, and I think that was more than fair given the fact that we had at least allowed her to accompany us. Jeff was napping in the room, but around 1 hour after we had reached the hotel, I woke up because Addison was calling me, and she apparently wanted to go out and get some lunch. I did not find it odd because she didn't have a proper meal on the flight, and she wanted company, so I agreed with her. She invited me to her room. She told me that we could just sit in her room and eat since she had already ordered something special for the both of us. I thought that it was really nice of her, so we got to talking, and I did not notice anything odd going on. Then we got the food, and I was a little skeptical about trying out the dessert because it looked really weird and sloppy, but the guy who brought it to us made it exactly according to the instructions that had been given to them by Addison, and even she said that she had read about this dessert, which was apparently a traditional Egyptian dessert that she had read about online, and I don't remember what she came up with, but it was not something that I had before. I did not want to hurt anybody's feelings, so I decided to try it out, and if it's a really bad mistake because the next thing that I remember, I woke up in the ER because I had the worst allergic reaction I have had in the last 10 years. Apparently, she had instructed them to use a lot of peanut butter in the dessert, and I am deadly allergic to peanuts. In the dessert that she had ordered, she had specifically instructed them to use a lot of peanut butter in it, and then she had told them to use a lot of vanilla ice cream and dates to cover the smell of the peanut butter. Unfortunately, I hadn't smelled the dish before I tried it, and I just had a couple of bites without even thinking about it. That was really enough for me to have a terrible reaction to the stuff, and that's how I ended up in the ER. I just remember my throat closing up and having trouble breathing after I had a few bites, and I knew that there was something really weird about the dish, but there was nobody else in the room apart from Addison, and I knew that she was crazy, but I'm sure that she was not crazy enough to let me die in front of her. So I yelled at her to bring me my EpiPen from my room. Thankfully, she had the sense to realize that something had gone horribly wrong, so she instantly called the receptionist and told them to get an ambulance for me, and then alerted Jeff to what was going on. I don't remember much after that since it was all a blur, and I was really struggling to just keep breathing. I had to be taken to the nearest hospital, and there they treated me in the ER. This was 3 days ago, and I'm still in disbelief about what happened. Jeff and I are still in Egypt, for the record, but Addison has been sent home. Once I was discharged from the hospital and came back to the hotel, I narrated the entire incident to Jeff. All that he had known was what he had gathered from the hotel authorities, that Addison had ordered a dessert loaded with peanut butter and had served it to me. The next thing they knew, I was being rushed out of the hotel to the ER because I had a severe allergic reaction. The hotel staff made it very clear that nobody had mentioned anything about being allergic to peanuts, and they were just adhering to the instructions that they had been provided with. Nevertheless, they still apologized for whatever had happened, even though it was not their fault. Jeff had already had a one-on-one conversation with Addison about what had happened, and she had been really scared, so he had just yelled at her while we were in the hospital, and she had refused to comment on anything. I had consumed such copious amounts of peanut butter that they had to keep me overnight to observe if I had any other symptoms or whatever. The next morning, I went back to the hotel with Jeff and Addison, and she did not say anything to anybody for the rest of the time that she was there. Once we were back at the hotel, I explained everything that had happened to Jeff while Addison remained in her room. Once he had heard me out, he was furious and immediately got up and went to Addison's room. He was there for about 2 hours, and once he came back, he told me that he was sending Addison back on the next flight home. She had not even put up a fight because she knew that what she had done was incredibly dangerous and could have gotten me killed, so she literally had nothing to say to defend her and had just accepted whatever punishment she got. Jeff also told me that he had spoken to Addison and told her that from now on he was not going to send her any allowances and she was completely on her own. He was going to pay off her college tuition since he had committed that to her, and he was going to live up to his promise, but apart from that amount he was not going to give her any sort of money, and if she wanted cash for her other expenses while she was at college, she would have to figure it out all on her own because he was sick of cleaning up after her, and she needed to learn how to be a decent human being first. And I thought that it was a fair decision. Even if I didn't, it would not be in my hands to change it because it was between Jeff and his daughter. I did not bring up anything about Addison after the discussion because I just wanted to be able to enjoy my honeymoon, and talking about it over and over again would not change the facts. However, Addison did not find it acceptable that her father had decided to cut off her funds, but instead of bothering him with it, she decided to start by bugging me. She has sent me multiple emails so far telling me that she was just trying to prank me and she had completely forgotten about my peanut allergy. She told me that apparently her plan was to feed me a bad dessert, and that was it. She did not have any ulterior motives. I highly doubt that, but anyway, it's not my fault that I had to be sent to the ER because of her idea of what constitutes a good prank. It was her plan, and now she was facing the consequences of it. I can't help that. I have told Jeff about the emails, and he has told me that he's going to try to talk to her, and I know that he has, but she still keeps sending me emails every other hour. In the last one, she was trying to guilt-trip me so badly, saying that she lives really far away from home and needs the money since she doesn't have the time to work because she's exhausted after a day at college, and I'm the only person who can make it happen. She is literally begging me to fix this situation. To be honest, I don't really want it because I don't want to get into this and ruin my honeymoon. At the same time, I feel kind of bad for her as well. If it indeed was a prank, it just backfired badly, and the consequences have been dire. I just don't know what to do, and I feel like a bad person right now for not wanting to talk to my husband about giving his daughter money when she goes back to college. Update 1. Hi. So I took the advice that most of you guys had for me and stopped reading the emails that Addison has been sending me and just focused on enjoying my honeymoon. It has been 24 hours since I made the post here, and most people in the comment section only had one thing to say, that I should just stop reading her emails if they are making me upset. I guess that's right since I can't change anything about it because I don't want to let myself feel guilty for something that I'm not responsible for, even if it was a prank, and I owe it to myself to enjoy this holiday. So that's what I'm going to be trying to do. I also discussed it with Jeff, and he told me that I made the right call by choosing to ignore those emails because reading them again and again is only going to make me feel worse about what's happened. I can't change it, and I can't change his mind either because he knows that what he is doing is the right thing to do in this situation, and Addison really needs to grow up. She is in college right now, and there is really no excuse for this kind of behavior anymore. She's not a teenager who cannot regulate her emotions and keep them under control. I think she has had several opportunities to talk to me and clear the air between the two of us. But she hasn't done that yet, and that's not on me. I don't need to feel guilty about any of this right now. And yeah, I'm just going to try and enjoy my vacation. I've been working really hard for the past few years, and we have earned this. Update 2. Hi. So Jeff and I are back from Egypt, and when we came back home this afternoon, we realized that Addison was waiting for us at home. She had never gone back to college after being sent back here from Egypt and had been waiting for us at home all along. She knew where the spare keys had been kept, and that's how she got in and had been living on her own for the past few days, waiting for us to come back. She had been pretty comfortable, and when we came back home, she was actually watching television in the living room. She didn't even seem surprised to see us back and greeted us like it was no big deal. This time I had a much better space of mind and state than I was previously the last time that she saw me in the ER, so I decided to deal with her this time. I told her that I did not feel safe around her. I was not comfortable with her living with us, so she had to go back to college, also because Jeff was paying for her to get educated, and she was wasting that money by staying at home while we were not around. I told her that I did not want her there and instructed her to get out. But instead of speaking to me, she completely ignored whatever I said and went straight to Jeff. She told him that she did not care about anything else, but she knew that he could not just cut her off and stop paying for her expenses just because of a stupid prank that she had pulled. She tried to emotionally manipulate him by saying that she was his only daughter, and he was the only family that she had that she could count on, so he could not just abandon her like this. I could see Jeff softening up, so I decided to intervene and reminded him that her little prank had actually sent me to the ER, and I was not even sure if it was completely innocent or not because judging by her past, she was fully capable of doing it on purpose and then trying to cover it up because of the consequences. I did not want to say that out loud, but honestly, she had left me with no other option. I did not want to make it sound like I was trying to drive a wedge between the two of them, but she was acting in a really disrespectful way. She had said that she was sorry, but how could I even count that when she was acting like this after I had come back from my trip? When I tried to imply that she might have sent me to the ER with her prank on purpose, she finally turned around and acknowledged my existence. She seemed very angry and told me that if she had to actually do that on purpose, she would have gone with something much worse and wouldn't even have called the hotel authorities and got me an ambulance to take me to the hospital. She would have just let me suffer for a couple of minutes more. It sounded pretty psychopathic the way that she put it, and I told her that was the exact reason why I did not trust her anymore, and I did not want to live with us. I told her that she had grossly misused the trust that her father had placed in her, and I had tried to be very kind to her for so many years, but she just didn't care about it and did not value anybody's emotions, which is why she was behaving like this. Things got a little heated, and we were arguing, but then she got all up in my face, and then she shoved me. I'm sure that she did not mean for it to be a hard push, but I kind of took a few steps back, and that's when Jeff intervened and told her that he had had enough and she had to leave. That was just about it because she was getting physical, and she had already put my life in danger once. He was not about to let it happen again. She started accusing him of prioritizing me over his own daughter, and he said that he was just prioritizing doing the right thing and nothing else. There was nothing more to it than that. So they had a bit of an argument, and she accused him of a lot of things and called him a lot of names. But then she finally left after packing her bags, and she seemed more angry than sad about what was going on. It has been a couple of hours since then, and Jeff and I are unpacking and trying to wrap our heads around what's going on right now. It's very upsetting, the thing that's going on with Addison, because at the end of the day, she's just a teenager, and I do feel bad for her, but I can't help it. She pushed me today, and she has already sent me to the ER once, and as Jeff says, it's not about to happen again. We are simply not going to entertain it or encourage it, so she can look out for herself now since we have given her enough opportunities to change and become a better person. Update 3. So it has been a week since we returned from our honeymoon, and today Jeff told me that Addison sent him an email and said that he was going to drop out of college if she did not receive money from him every month as an allowance, like she had been used to before, because apparently everything was getting too stressful for her and she couldn't do this anymore. This is getting really difficult because as much as he wants to punish her, he doesn't want her to drop out of college and ruin her life, and I don't know what to say to him because this is really getting complicated. I don't like Addison anymore. She has been awful to me and has done a lot of nasty things. But at the same time, I don't know if I want her to fail in life. I definitely wouldn't want that for anybody. I do feel like she's threatening Jeff to a certain degree since it's like saying that she will ruin her own life if he doesn't bend over backward for her. I think it will be pretty easy for her to find a job and start working and pay for herself, but she's not going to do that. It's not even that she has to worry about her college tuition, that's still going to be covered by Jeff, but for everything else, her miscellaneous expenses, she just has to arrange money for that. She doesn't even have to worry about rent since her college provides on-campus accommodation, and it's pretty easy for her. So she has to either live very frugally and take up a part-time job, or she can continue cribbing. I personally don't have anything to say about any of this, but Jeff is really stressed out. The only thing I feel right now is kind of annoyed at the way that she is behaving because she's just making everything difficult for everyone. It doesn't have to be as hard as this, but it feels like unless there is some problem, she's not happy. I honestly don't know what to say anymore, just really frustrated by the way that she's acting. She really needs to grow up and start thinking like an adult instead of constantly throwing tempered tantrums over every little thing because it's getting old now. Update 4. I had a little discussion with Jeff about the email that Allison had sent to him, and together we decided that we were just going to respond to her and tell her that we were going to be fine with any decision that she made, but whatever she decided, she should not expect us to financially support her if she decides to drop out. She is, after all, 18 years of age, and legally she's not a minor anymore. Also, she has not been living with us for the past few months. She has been in college, so if she tries to come back home, we're just going to have her reported to the cops for trespassing, and she won't be able to live with us. So she has two options right now. She can continue with college and deal with the consequences of her actions and try to get a part-time job and look after herself. Basically, she can choose to grow up or she can do the same thing but the hard way, because if she decides to drop out of college, she will not only be out of a place to live, but she will also be out of our lives forever because Jeff has made it very clear that he does not want to entertain this BS since she constantly tries to emotionally manipulate him and stuff because it's getting really nasty now. I think we will be completely done with this, and this is what it is right now. We don't have to bend over backward for her. That's it. Jeff was also getting really tired, so this was the only thing that occurred to us. We sent an email to her a couple of hours ago and are waiting for a response from her. I have no idea what she's going to say to this. She's probably just going to try to blame the entire thing on me and act like this was all my idea. But really, I did not come up with this email, it was all Jeff. He was the one who said that he had had enough. The only thing that I said to him was that I think that he should go ahead with this because she really needs to grow up. In the end, this is for her own betterment. Update 5. Hey, it's midnight right now, and we just received an email from Addison. She told us that she had decided to stay in college and was going to get a part-time job. She expressed how disappointed she was in the way that Jeff was speaking to her, and said that she had never thought that she would have to ever face a day when her own father would not be on her side anymore. There was a lot of manipulative crap in the email as well, which I don't even want to talk about because she's just trying to play the victim, and we all know it quite well now. Anyway, my point is that our plan worked. She is going to stay in college and face the consequences of her actions, and Jeff and I are just going to try and not think about this because we are still in the honeymoon phase right now, and we want to have fun. It's been stressful for the past couple of days. We can't deal with that sort of thing anymore. We deserve better. Now on to the next story. Story 3. I caught my sister's fiancé breaking into my house to steal my dead mom's wedding dress. It's quite a surprise for me, 29F, to find myself in the midst of a drama-filled fiasco involving a break-in, a jealous stepsister, and the looming possibility of a lawsuit. Nevertheless, this is how my life has unfolded recently. So let me provide you with a detailed rundown of the chaotic events that have taken place. To give a bit of background, my parents' love story was like a sappy rom-com that turned into a horror flick. They had me at a very early age, hence they could not cope with the stress of parenthood along with their work stress. Their continuous fights eventually led them to get divorced when I was barely out of my teens. My mom and dad decided to stay amicable for the sake of me and always continued to have a respectful relationship. When I was in college, my mother found comfort in the arms of the man she believed was the love of her life, my soon-to-be stepdad Carlos. They eventually got engaged, and she called to relay the happy news. Although I wasn't thrilled about the fact that she was going to get married again, I also knew that it wasn't my place to interfere in her life or stand in the way of her happiness. I was introduced to Carlos and his stepdaughter, who was soon going to be my stepsister, Amelia. Amelia never really liked me from the beginning. Felt like she saw me as a problem, and I couldn't figure out why. Her mom had passed away at an early age, hence maybe she thought I was taking away attention from her dad, or she just didn't like the idea of him marrying someone with a kid. Every time we crossed paths, she looked at me with disdain and talked to me rudely. It was obvious that she did not want to accept me or my mother. Because of this, family gatherings became awkward with forced smiles and uncomfortable exchanges where Amelia would make it abundantly clear on several occasions that she wasn't happy about the new family situation. Her dad and my mom attempted to diffuse the situation as much as possible. I also tried to be friendly to build some kind of sisterly bond, but every attempt was met with her ignoring me or making dismissive comments about my appearance or weight. Eventually, the day arrived when my mom and Carlos would be tying the knot. My mother had always wanted a simple wedding, so they were getting married in the backyard, which had transformed into a makeshift venue with colorful decorations and a charming gazebo where they could exchange their vows. I was nervous and excited about my mother's big day and helped with her wedding dress and makeup. Despite the celebratory atmosphere, Amelia's resentment lingered like a dark cloud. As my mom walked down the aisle, there was a subtle scowl on Amelia's face that betrayed her true feelings. During the vows, I noticed Amelia rolling her eyes and sighing loudly as if the whole affair was beneath her. Other guests were also starting to take notice of her behavior, and it was evident that she couldn't stand the idea of this marriage. The party eventually moved on to the reception area, which had been set up with homemade decorations and a buffet of everyone's favorite dishes. People were drinking, dancing, and overall having a good time. However, Amelia took every opportunity to rain on the parade. She made sarcastic remarks during toasts, creating an uncomfortable atmosphere. Even when people tried to engage her in conversation, she responded with curt, one-word answers, displaying her disapproval. As the night progressed, Amelia's behavior became increasingly disruptive. She openly complained about the choice of music, criticized the decorations, and refused to participate in family photos. It was as if she was determined to make her displeasure known, not caring that it was tarnishing what should have been a beautiful day for our family. Her behavior irritated me so much that I wanted to confront her, but my mother tried to calm me down. She suggested that Amelia might be hurting seeing her dad getting married again, and that we should give her space to deal with her emotions. My mother always hoped that Amelia would come around over time, but as the years went by, my mother's wish never came true. While my relationship with Carlos stayed okay, the tension with Amelia continued to escalate. Whenever I was back at home during my college vacations, I would have to listen to her taunts about how I didn't have any friends or how my fashion sense was so poor. Her dad, my stepdad Carlos, would step in, scolding her and insisting on an apology. The cycle of tension and forced apologies became a recurring theme during those visits. Whenever we had any family gatherings, Amelia would often make sly digs at me, trying to undermine my confidence. She would openly mock my achievements, belittling my grades or any accomplishments. If I said anything in return, she would try the victim, telling everyone how I was always rude to her. It was always frustrating for me because I would hear her gossiping about me to relatives, spreading false stories to tarnish my image for absolutely no reason. I complained to Carlos multiple times about her behavior, but despite his attempts to make her stop, she never changed. Over time, to escape the cloud of negativity with Amelia, I decided to spend more time at my dad's place during holidays instead of going to my mom and Carlos' place. Sure, he lived across the country, making it quite a journey, but the distance was a welcome relief from the constant presence of a jealous and scowling stepsister. My mother, with her hopeful heart, would often try to persuade me to spend holidays with her. However, I couldn't find the heart to tell her about the relentless bullying I endured at the hands of Amelia. She held on to this idealized vision of us getting along, and I didn't want to shatter her dreams. The holidays with my dad were like a safe haven from the bad vibes of my mom's place. I could relax without feeling judged by Amelia. Dad's house became my escape where I didn't have to deal with mean comments or Amelia's angry stares all the time. One day when I was in my third year of college, we received some devastating news about my mother. She had gone for a regular health checkup where she was informed that she had third-stage ovarian cancer. When she relayed the news to me, I almost collapsed in shock. I couldn't imagine my life without my dear mother. I immediately rushed back home to be there for my mother. Carlos was visibly distraught, trying his best to be strong for all of us. My dad, friends, and family rallied around us, offering support and comfort in the face of this uncertain future. As the days unfolded, we navigated the challenges of medical treatments, hospital visits, and the emotional roller coaster that accompanies such a grim diagnosis. It's worth mentioning that, unfortunately, Amelia didn't contribute in any way to helping my mother during this challenging time. While we were grappling with the harsh realities of cancer, her actions remained indifferent and unhelpful. I remember one night as everything got tough. I was sitting alone outside my mom's room and crying. I was afraid of losing my mother to cancer and was hoping for some peace in the quiet of the night. But then out of nowhere, Amelia walked by and noticed that I was crying, sitting outside my mom's bedroom. Instead of being nice or understanding, she saw my face all wet with tears and just smirked at me. I looked up at her, and she started to taunt how there was nothing that I could do at this point. It was a moment when I needed support, and her mean reaction made everything even harder for me. In the days that came after that night, Amelia didn't stop her cruelty. She went so far as to send me social media posts about how cancer patients looked in their final moments. It was beyond heartbreaking to see how she could make fun of my pain and the agony our family was going through. The lack of empathy was just unbearable. In those difficult days, I found solace in the strength my mother displayed. Her resilience in the face of adversity inspired me. Despite the physical toll the treatments took on her, she remained a beacon of courage, teaching me the true meaning of fighting against the odds. Even as the disease progressed, she maintained a spirit that refused to be extinguished. Unfortunately, my mother passed away in a few months as her cancer spread, and the devastation I felt was indescribable. I cried for days, not being able to believe that she was really gone. The pain was like a heavy fog engulfing me all around. The funeral was a somber affair, marked by tearful goodbyes by everyone. The reality of her absence settled in after the funeral, and I grappled with the void that her departure had left in my life. The grieving process was a slow and arduous journey. The realization that I could no longer pick up the phone and hear her voice or share the mundane details of my day was a harsh truth that weighed heavily on my heart. The world continued to spin, but my anchor was gone, and I was adrift in the sea of grief. The day arrived when my mother's will was to be read. My dad, me, Carlos, and Amelia all drove to the lawyer's office together. As my mom's only biological child, I was well aware of the contents of the will, having discussed it with her on several occasions before she passed away. Mom and Carlos had discussed and made it clear that their respective assets would be bequeathed to their own children. It seemed like a fair arrangement, reflective of the intricate dynamics of our blended family. Seated in the lawyer's office, surrounded by an air of formality, the anticipation was palpable as the lawyer began to read her will. It became evident that all of Mom's assets were entrusted to me, as Carlos and I had known all along. While this announcement didn't surprise me, the same couldn't be said for Amelia. She sat across the room, her eyes narrowing in disbelief and resentment. As the lawyer read the will, in addition to the money and stuff, Mom also left me some family heirlooms. She passed on my grandmother's beautiful jewelry to me, and it meant a lot. Those pieces had sentimental value, connecting me to my roots. One precious item she left me was her wedding dress, a symbol of love and family history. It was more than just fabric. It held the memories of Mom's special day, and she wanted me to have it. These inheritances weren't just things. They were a part of our family story, and I cherished them deeply. Upon hearing that she wasn't included in my mother's will, nor did she get anything, Amelia erupted angrily. She began to make a scene, demanding to check the will to verify if my mother had really left me with everything that she owned. Once she saw the will with her own eyes, she looked up at me angrily, shouting that she couldn't believe how selfish my mother was. I sat there in shock as she continued to demand that I should divide my mother's assets with her as she rightfully deserves it. Her words hurt and were an unsettling disruption to the respectful acknowledgement of my mother's wishes. The hurtful accusations she hurled in her pursuit of a piece of the inheritance were like daggers. I was already burdened with grief on account of losing my mother, but hearing Amelia's words made me feel betrayed. The audacity she had to demand that she should get an equal share in my mother's assets left me momentarily speechless. Summoning the strength to respond, I sought to maintain a semblance of composure. I told her, "My mom got married to your dad when we were both young adults. Hence they both made their wishes clear from the beginning that we would be getting their respective assets. It's not about being selfish, it's about respecting the agreement our parents had with each other. This is what they believed was fair, and I intend to honor my mom's wishes." Amelia tried to complain again, but Carlos cut her off, telling her firmly that she had no right to ask for anything from me. He reminded her that someday she would inherit his assets, and she wouldn't appreciate it if I demanded a share at that time. This seemed to shut her up. My dad, who was there with us, got up to walk me out of the room. I had often shared stories with him about Amelia's erratic behavior, but this was the first time he had witnessed it himself. He was completely shocked and disgusted by her sense of entitlement. My dad advised me to move out of Carlos' place and move all my childhood things as well as my mother's things and family heirlooms to his house so Amelia could not steal them from me. I agreed and immediately moved everything that belonged to me and my mother out of Carlos' place. Carlos was sad to see me move out, and so was I because, unlike Amelia, he always treated me with respect and love. He has continued to check up on me and made sure that I was doing okay in my life. I went on to graduate from my college and eventually secured a job. Fast forward to the point where I saved up enough money to live on my own. The assets my mother left for me weren't substantial, but they were sufficient to help me secure a place of my own. My dad was very proud of me and even came to visit, staying at my new place. I often found myself missing my mom, wishing she could see the space I had created. I kept her wedding dress safely in my wardrobe, and whenever I started to miss her a lot, I would hug the dress as if embracing the memory of my mother. Not long ago, Carlos gave me a call to share the news that Amelia was tying the knot. Surprisingly, I found myself genuinely happy for her. Setting aside our past grievances, Carlos, in his usual enthusiastic manner, invited me for lunch, expressing that it had been quite a while since we caught up. He wanted to prepare my favorite meal. Although I hesitated a bit, he reassured me that Amelia had grown more mature since our last meeting, and he promised to ensure a smooth and pleasant interaction during lunch at Carlos' place. Everything seemed to be going smoothly. Amelia looked genuinely happy to see me, and I warmly congratulated her for her upcoming marriage. We were having lunch while discussing our lives and how much it had changed since we last met each other. She showed me pictures of her engagement, and I could see how happy she looked with my soon-to-be Bill. As we sat around the table enjoying the meal Carlos had prepared, Amelia unexpectedly dropped a bombshell. In a casual tone, she mentioned that she was still on the hunt for the perfect wedding dress but had been unsuccessful. Then, out of nowhere, she brought up the idea that she remembered my mother had left a wedding dress for me and asked me to give it to her as a wedding gift. I looked up at her in shock. The shock on my face mirrored Carlos's surprise. I asked her if she was joking with me because there was no way she would ask me for my mother's wedding dress. But Amelia replied that because she was getting married before me, she deserved to wear the dress. I couldn't believe her callous words. I firmly stated that this was not something I could ever consider, emphasizing the sentimental value it held for me after our mother's passing. I reminded her that it was not just a piece of clothing but a cherished memory of my mother. Amelia, on the other hand, seemed dismissive of my sentiments. She argued that since we were stepsisters and shared a part of our mother's life, she had an equal right to wear the dress. The atmosphere grew heavy with tension, and I couldn't fathom why she would want to take something so meaningful from me. Carlos attempted to defuse the situation, telling Amelia that she had no right to demand my mother's wedding dress. But Amelia seemed resolute in her desire, stating that she was ready to pay me for the dress if that's what I wanted. The tension continued to rise as I felt hurt and frustrated that she couldn't understand the importance of the dress to me. Carlos, sensing the escalating conflict, tried to explain to Amelia that it wasn't about money, but the dress itself meant a lot to me as it was something that my mother had left behind for me. Amelia then began to say how my mother would have given her the dress had she been alive, and I was just being selfish. I couldn't believe the audacity of her claim, especially considering how she had treated me over the years. I angrily pointed out to her that she had no concern for my mother when she was dying of cancer, and yet she now had a sudden desire to wear my mother's dress out of nowhere. The exchange started to become more heated as we continued to yell at each other. I reiterated that the dress was not negotiable and that I couldn't fathom parting with such a meaningful keepsake. Amelia's insistence and apparent disregard for my feelings intensified the conflict. Carlos tried to calm down the situation, but I realized that Amelia was not going to back down. I decided to leave their place immediately as I had spoken my mind and was not going to sit there and be disrespected further by Amelia. I thanked Carlos for the meal and left. I told my dad about this whole incident, and he was just as shocked as me. He suggested that I should immediately install cameras around my place along with an alarm system. I thought this was a bit overdramatic, but knowing Amelia's crazy antics, I decided to listen to my dad. Cut to today. I am at work swamped with meetings when suddenly my phone blows up with alarm notifications from my home security system. Concerned, I open the app to see an unidentified man wearing a mask entering my place. I immediately panicked when I saw the thief in my place. I dial 911 at lightning speed and race home as if my life depended on it. As I screech into my driveway, cop cars are scattered in front of my place. I dash inside with a worried look only to find police officers in the process of arresting the man. His legs are bleeding. Apparently, my dog took serious offense to this intruder's unwelcome visit and turned into a full-fledged guard dog. When the police turned him around to escort him out, I couldn't help but let out an audible sigh of relief. I recognized him immediately from Amelia's engagement pictures. He's my soon-to-be Bill. When he noticed me standing in the doorway, he began shouting, demanding that I speak to the police and vouch for him. He started explaining that he was only here to take my mother's wedding dress because my stepsister had pressured him into doing it. My eyes widened in shock as the absurdity of the situation struck me. Breaking into a house on someone else's orders? I couldn't fathom how he got himself into such a ridiculous predicament. I shook my head in disbelief, but before I could react, the police intervened and took him away. I then called my dad, recounting what had just happened at my place. He assured me that he would catch the next available flight to be with me. Feeling comforted by the thought of my father's support, I carefully went through my house to check if anything was missing. Fortunately, my mother's wedding dress, safely tucked away in my wardrobe, remained untouched. It seemed my Bill's ill-conceived plan had failed after my dog had bravely intervened by attacking him. I couldn't help but smile in satisfaction as I patted my dog. But oh, the drama doesn't end there. My jealous stepsister and her relatives have been calling me, demanding that I should drop my charges against her partner. She is insisting that he is part of the family and I should forgive him. I have told them to keep their opinions to themselves because the last time I checked, the family doesn't break into your house and try to snatch your heirlooms. I have also threatened to sue her and her partner for the damages caused to my property. Amelia keeps saying that I'm going to ruin their lives, but this time I'm going to stand my ground. This is my mother's legacy we're talking about. The dress stays with me, and my sister and my soon-to-be Bill better lawyer up because we're going to court. The family's mad, but I got evidence and the law on my side. So idgaff for defending my turf and my mom's memory against a thief. Update 1. It's been a few days since my last update. I had a conversation with Carlos regarding everything that happened. He was just as shocked as me and had no idea about what Amelia and her partner had been up to. Amelia had knowingly kept her dad in the dark about her partner's breaking and entering and subsequent arrest, knowing that he would not support her antics. Carlos assured me that he would stand by whatever decision I made. Meanwhile, Amelia has continued to reach out to me every day. When she realized that I wasn't going to back down, she started to apologize. This was shocking to me as throughout the years I had known her, she never apologized to me about anything. I guess watching her partner get arrested had finally made her realize what they had done. She begged me for mercy and pleaded that I should drop the charges against him. She assured me that she would never disturb me in the future. But after all the years she had spent bullying me, I knew her words held no value. I firmly told her that I would continue to press charges and would see both of them in small claims court soon. My dad and I have contacted a lawyer who can help us in this situation. Regarding Amelia's relatives who were pressuring me to drop the charges, I took a decisive step. I sent out a mass email with a video clip from my security camera. This video clearly showed how my Bill broke into my home. I knew Amelia would have spun a different story to them, and I couldn't let that happen. No sane person would support such an outrageous act. After sending the email, some of her relatives did reach out to me apologizing. They had no idea about the truth of the situation, and my evidence opened their eyes. It was a relief to know that at least some of them understood the reality of what went down and acknowledged the wrongfulness of the break-in. Update 2. It's been 1 month since my last update. I could not update earlier as I was busy with my legal proceedings. As I had mentioned earlier, I decided to go through with the charges, seeking justice for the intrusion into my home. The legal battle unfolded where I was awarded $1,000 for the damages caused to my property during the break-in. I turned to look at my stepsister's face, who looked utterly destroyed, perhaps realizing the consequences of her actions. Her partner faced criminal charges for breaking and entering and was sentenced to only 3 months in jail because he didn't actually steal anything from my place. My lawyer didn't stop there and has also issued my stepsister and her partner with a restraining order. It's a necessary measure to ensure my safety and protect against any further attempts to disrupt my life. Throughout this entire ordeal, my dad has been staying with me for support. He's still worried that Amelia might try something again, but I doubt she'll have the nerve after getting hit with a restraining order and a $1,000 fine. The legal consequences will have put a damper on any further attempts for her to cause any trouble. Update 3. It's been 6 months since my last update. My life has moved forward by now, and thankfully, there is no longer any drama. The chaotic events that once defined my days have become distant memories. The legal battles, the family tensions, and the emotional roller coaster have all subsided, allowing me to find a semblance of peace in my life. Since the court proceedings, Amelia and her partner have kept their distance from me. The restraining order served its purpose, providing a protective barrier against any potential disruptions they might have caused. I did hear from some of our mutual friends that Amelia got married to him after he was released from prison. Honestly, I believe they both deserve to be with each other, knowing how crazy they both are. As I reflect on the turbulent journey of the past months, I have come to realize the importance of resilience and standing up for what is right. The legal battles were not just about seeking justice for myself, but also about upholding the values and memories that my mother held dear. I find myself in a calmer, more stable place in life. It's a new chapter, and I look forward to what the future holds, free from the tumultuous drama that once defined my existence. Now on to the next story. Story 4. Dad wanted to marry his young GF only 2 weeks after my mom died and forced me to attend. threatening to kick me out if I refused. So I did something that would make him regret his words. My father has always been horrible to me right from a very young kid. It was clear to me that he was not interested in being a dad, but I never could figure out which he hated more, being married to my mom or being a father to me. I think he must have hated it equally since he did not treat my mother any better than he treated me. I turned 17 a couple of months ago, and just 4 weeks back I lost my mother. It was not unexpected. She had been fighting with lung cancer for quite some time, and she finally succumbed to it in the hospital 4 weeks back. She had been diagnosed 3 years ago, and since then it felt like I had been holding my breath, and when she passed away I think I finally let it all go. She was my best friend, and even now it feels really surreal to not have her around. Most importantly, she was the only person who was there to protect me from my father. I grew up in a house where every single day my parents would fight over something or the other. It was very clear that they did not love each other, and I honestly don't even know why they were married. Every time I asked my mother why she had married him, she would tell me that they had loved each other at some point. They would always make up, but I was never able to forgive my father as quickly as my mom did. I had advised her to leave him several times because sometimes when they were fighting he would say absolutely horrible things to her. He would say things like how he regretted ever being with her and having a child with her, and he wished she passed away from her disease so he could move on with his life. I would tell her to leave repeatedly, but she just refused, and I don't know why. As for me, I had wanted to leave ever since I was 4 years old, but I had nowhere else to go and no other family either. My mother was an orphan who had lost her parents in an accident when she was literally and had been raised by her grandmother, who passed away when she was in college. She did not have any other family members who she was in touch with, and I did not know my father's side of the family because he never took us to meet them. He claimed that he did not get along well with his family, which is why he did not want us to meet them. There was no elaboration, and I was too scared to ask him. I was used to getting yelled at for things, so I wasn't going to paint a target on myself by prying into something like that. Anyway, my parents were the only family that I had, which is why I had to deal with my father because my mother refused to leave. After she passed away, I was devastated. But my dad went about his business like nothing had even happened. It was not surprising to me in the slightest because even when she was sick, he had been acting the same way. I did not expect him to care because I knew that he did not love anybody. He was probably not even capable of that, but what really surprised me is that just 2 weeks after my mother had passed away, once we were done with the funeral and formalities, my dad brought home a much younger woman. She was just there one morning sipping coffee in our living room, and when I mustered up the courage asked my father who she was, he told me that she was my new mother. Apparently, he also had the biggest smile on his face, probably his creepiest one yet, when he was telling me that. In spite of myself, I couldn't help but comment on it, and I told him that it was a bit too soon to bring home his girlfriend since it had been just 2 weeks since my mother had passed away, and that earned me a lecture from him about how this was going to be my stepmom in a few days and so I needed to respect her. He told me that he did not care that I had just lost my mother. I had to respect her the same way and treat her just like I had treated my own mom. I was beside myself with anger, and I tried to argue with him, so he dropped another bombshell on me and told me that he was getting married. He said that ever since my mother's diagnosis he had known that she would not be able to make it because she had always been weak and fragile ever since he had known her, so he had started looking for replacements, that's literally the word that he used, since then, and he had been with Melissa, his girlfriend, for the past 2 years. He told me that now that my mother was finally out of the way he was going to get married again, and he was going to make sure that her passing did not affect his life in any way. It finally made sense why he had been unaffected by my mother's sickness and death so far because he had replaced her. I was disgusted and honestly just repulsed by him, and I told him that I would not be attending the wedding, and I expected him to say that he was fine with that because honestly why would he care? But then he told me that it was necessary for me to attend, so that took me by surprise, and when I asked him why that was, he told me that only if I attended would he be able to make this seem normal and acceptable to other people. Apparently, according to him, me being present at the W would mean that I had accepted it, and if his own daughter did not have a problem with this marriage, nobody else would have any reason to comment on it either. So basically he needed me to be there so it would seem less depraved, which in itself was pretty psychotic. I honestly believe that my father had lost his mind, since not only was he saying such weird and senseless things, But he was also getting married just 2 weeks after his wife had passed away without caring about what other people would say. And not just that, the woman marrying him was just a couple of years older than me. She was 25 at most, I don't know her exact age, but she couldn't be older than that, and my dad is in his late 40s. It's creepy enough as it is the fact that this guy is somebody who recently lost his wife to cancer and should be grieving right now but is instead getting married and expecting his daughter to pretend like this is all normal and that she supports it. It's a total recipe for disaster, and I really think that he belongs in a straitjacket in a padded room. When he told me that he was marrying Melissa, I told him that there was no way I could be attending this wedding, and if he wanted to get offended at that he was welcome to do so. But then he told me that he would not just be getting offended, he would be kicking me out if I did not attend, and he would also make sure that I did not get access to the college fund that he and my mother had been setting aside for me ever since I was born. I thought that it was majorly unfair because, like he had said, it was not just his money that had gone into the college fund but also my mom's, and I believed that I was entitled to it, but unfortunately, I could not force him to hand over that money to me since it's not required by law to do so. It was not like he had set it up specifically for that use since there were no documents to prove it. So basically, if I did not attend that wedding, I would be getting kicked out and I wouldn't have any prospects of going to college either. I was in a really difficult situation because on one hand I did not want to seem like I was part of this or that I was encouraging this insanity in any way whatsoever, but on the other hand, I also had to look out for myself because there were still a couple of months to go before I left for college and I couldn't afford to lose out on money since I did not have any of my own, and it would take some time for my mother's will to get processed, and only then would I get the inheritance. So for now, it did not seem like I had any other option but to attend the wedding and make it seem like I was supporting my father. I was told about the wedding last week, but I honestly couldn't bring myself to accept it. So I decided that I had to go all out in order to stop this from happening or at least try to do something to his face. I told my father that I would be attending the wedding, but then I started trying to look for something, anything to disrupt what was going on because I just couldn't bring myself to allow this to happen. I honestly didn't even know what I was looking for. I just wanted something, and I got really lucky, like miraculously lucky when my father left his laptop unattended. He and Melissa went out for dinner a couple of days back to celebrate the fact that they were getting married, and I was alone at home. My dad had left his laptop on the coffee table. I did not expect anything when I opened it since it was locked, so I just tried to guess the password, and luckily I got it right. It was Melissa's name followed by his own birthday, which was weirdly shocking. Anyway, once I was in, I could barely even believe it. I started going through his social media, and initially I found nothing, but then I realized that he had 2 profiles on Facebook, and I decided to go through the other one which I had not seen earlier. To my surprise, that was his secret account just for his side of the family. He had been telling my mother and me that he did not get along with his family, but here he was on his other profile hanging out with people we had never seen before who looked like they were definitely related to him. The more I scrolled, the more photos I found dating back to years ago. It was very obvious that he had been in touch with his family all along. He had just been lying to us, and then I decided to go through his messages on that account, and I found out that he had been in touch with his parents for a really long time. I'm guessing he also had another phone. He had essentially been leading a double life right from the beginning, and nobody had a clue. My mother and I had never known about any of this, and even if she had known, she had never told me about it, and I was pretty sure that his family had no idea that I even existed. After going through his conversations with his father on his account, I realized that his father thought that he was living away from home for work and nothing else. Little did he know that he had a whole family here. I quickly took photos of those chats and went to my own phone so I could speak to my grandfather. I was quite nervous because I had no idea if he would even believe me because all of this was so ridiculous. I could barely even believe it myself. Nevertheless, I went to my room and I logged into my own Facebook account and contacted the profile that I had seen on my dad's account. Just as I had suspected, there had been 0 mutual friends, which is why I had never been able to find him. I hadn't even known my grandfather's real name for all these years, which is why I had never been able to track these people. Now that I had his account, I messaged him immediately and tried to explain everything as quickly as I could. I gave him my phone number, and I told him to contact me as soon as he could because this was an emergency. I attached some photos of the screenshots that I had taken explaining that this is how I had been able to track his profile, and I also attached some photos of me with my parents so that he would know that this was a prank on him. I did not get any response for the next 12 hours, and I had almost given up because I had thought that maybe he believed that somebody was playing a prank on him and had decided not to respond to me. But when my dad was at work, I finally received a call from my grandfather. I was just lucky that he had not talked to my father about this and had called me before that. Anyway, as soon as he called me, I answered my phone, and I explained to him what was going on. He told me that for the past 17 years, he had been led to believe that my father was living away from Iowa, which is where he was originally from, for his work. He had even visited his son several times, and apparently my dad had a separate house and everything here, which is where my grandparents had stayed whenever they visited him. They did not have the slightest clue about any of this. For the past 12 hours, they had just been trying to recover from the shock of it all. Initially, this all seemed like a prank to them, but when they saw my mother in the family photos that I had sent, they realized that it was all true. Apparently, the reason that my father had never told his parents about his marriage and the family that he had was because he had told him that he had broken up with my mother since they did not approve of her 18 years back when my parents had initially started dating. My grandparents had made it very clear that they did not want my father to marry my mother, and so he had told them that he had dumped her, and that's the lie that he had been peddling for the past 2 decades. But now he had finally been caught. The reason that my grandparents had not wanted my father to marry my mother was a pretty serious one. It was because my mother had apparently been trying to cheat on him, and they had accused her of being a gold digger. That was because the first time that my father had brought my mom home to meet his parents, she had immediately tried to hit on his older brother since he was a surgeon and obviously earned way more than my father. However, my grandparents had found out about it because my uncle refused to keep his mouth shut about something so serious, and they had demanded that my father break up with my mother, but he refused to do so, and I think that it was because of me because according to my calculations my mother was probably already pregnant by the time. And then my parents gave him an ultimatum that he could either break up with my mother or they would cut him out of their lives, since they knew that if they cut him off my mother would leave him because they believed that she was just with him for the money. My dad eventually told him that he had broken things off with my mother, but clearly not since they continued to stay together, and that's why I'm here. I don't know why they stayed together if my mother had actually done such things, and this completely changed my perception of both my parents. Anyway, once I got to know these things, I told my grandparents how poorly I was being treated and that I could not count on anybody else. But now that I knew that they existed and I wasn't as alone as I had initially believed, I was counting on them for help. But if they turned their backs on me, I would still understand. Thankfully, they chose to help me out, and I was able to stop the wedding from happening, and I got back at my father as well, and so did his parents. They flew down here a couple of days ago, and yesterday I managed to sneak them into the wedding, and all of a sudden we were the guests of honor. The wedding was being held in our backyard since only a couple of people were attending. It was meant to be a small and intimate ceremony. It was just my father's coworkers and employer, a couple of his friends, and that was it. Obviously, he had not invited his family. They hadn't even been invited to his first wedding, but I made it possible for them to attend the second. After Melissa had walked down the aisle and everything, I texted my grandparents, and I told them that it was finally time for them to show up because I wanted to stop this before the vow happened. Right before the vow, I snuck out, and then it was my turn to walk down the aisle with my grandparents just for the theatrics of it all. As soon as my father saw me walking down the aisle with his parents, his face fell, and Melissa looked pretty confused as well. Once I was near him, I announced to him that I had finally uncovered all his lies, and now his parents knew the truth, so he could say goodbye to his inheritance because that was not coming to him anymore. It was all coming to me instead, and I did not need him anymore either since I already had a place to live and people to take care of me and also my college fund, so he could do whatever he wanted since I knew that he was a liar and I did not wish to be associated with him. After that, I walked away with my grandparents, and since then we have been living in a hotel preparing to go back. There's a lot of catching up that I have to do with my grandparents since I haven't known these people, and there's also so much to talk about regarding my parents. The only reason we haven't returned yet is because this morning my father finally contacted my grandfather and told him that what he did was just not right, and he had apparently accused his parents of trying to control him his entire life and never letting him be happy. He also accused me of trying to ruin him by showing up at the wedding like that, saying that I just couldn't stand to see him happy with anybody else. He's blaming us all because now Melissa is refusing to talk to him, and the wedding was obviously called off yesterday itself just after we had left. Aita for showing up to my father's second wedding with his parents and exposing him for being a liar. Update 1. It's been 4 days since the wedding got called off. My grandparents and I decided not to respond to my father. He does not deserve it. If he wants to speak to us, he knows where to find us. We are still staying at the hotel. We have given him the details of it and have told him that if he wants to discuss things with us, he can visit us and then we can talk in person. But this is not the kind of discussion that we want to have over the phone or via text. He still hasn't shown up yet, and there's only 3 days before I go back to Loa with my grandparents. They have a farm there, they're pretty well off, and I will be taken care of far better than I was here. They promised me that they are going to make sure that I got to go to the college of my choice and I wouldn't have to suffer after this. My grandparents have been literally doting on me ever since we got to know each other, and I think they're trying to make up for lost time, which is pretty sweet of them. They hated my mother, and after this they hated my father as well. But they seem to love me a lot. Update 2. So my grandparents and I are supposed to leave in 2 days. This morning my father decided to finally pay us a visit and talk to us. I was quite surprised to find him in my grandparents' hotel room when they called me this morning, but I recovered from that pretty quickly, and I decided that I was not going to speak to him the entire time until he apologized. But obviously that's too much to expect from somebody like him. He was here only to talk about how unfair it was that my grandparents had decided that they were going to cut him out of their lives and give all the inheritance to me instead. He said that he had already lost his wife, my mother, and he had lost Melissa as well. I also did not wish to speak to him anymore, so things were pretty bad for him already, and to top it all off, all the guests who had been present at the wedding, his coworkers and close friends, are now acting weird with him because of what happened at the wedding, so his reputation is in shambles and he is considering even quitting his job because he doesn't think that he can work in such a hostile environment, to put it mildly. He has kind of lost everything that he had until a few days ago, but then we came along at the wedding, exposed him, and then ruined it all for him, so the least that we could do for him was at least let him have the inheritance, which is something that he had been working on for all these years, because otherwise he wouldn't have lied to all of us for so long in the first place. But he just wanted to make everybody happy, which is why he had started telling lies, and he promised that he had wanted to tell his parents the truth after he got married to my mother. But then as time went on, it just got more and more awkward to bring up, so he had to keep up with his lies and plan an elaborate double life. He claimed that he was the victim in the situation because after all it was his happiness that everybody was against, including his parents, so now he was only here to demand what actually belonged to him, the inheritance, since I would be taken care of anyway. But he had been hoping for this and working for this from the very beginning, and it was unfair to just take away from him for such a petty reason. I was already pissed off by the way that he was acting like he was the victim, and then when he said that he deserved to have that inheritance, I completely lost it. Before my grandparents could even say anything, I burst out at him, and I said that if he really deserved that inheritance, then I had also deserved to be treated like a human being for the past 17 years. But he had never shown me any sort of love or affection or even the bare minimum respect, and he had literally threatened to kick me out and use my college fund for his own personal expenses if I did not partake in his insanity and encourage his marriage to his young girlfriend just 2 weeks after I had lost my mother. If he could not offer me anything that I deserved, it was only fair that his parents took away whatever he believed he deserved. He was pretty shocked by my behavior because I had never been able to stand up to my dad like this, but now that I had my grandparents to support me, I was not afraid of him anymore. He even tried to glare at me, which would usually work when I was younger, and try to shut me down. But this time I was not going to shut up and just let him walk all over me. Earlier I would only do that because I knew that my mother wouldn't leave no matter what, probably because of the same reason that my father did not cut ties with his parents, because of the money, which proved to be pretty useless in the end since she passed away. She's only lucky that she passed away in a good hospital, but other than that there was no benefit to her staying with my father after her diagnosis. Anyway, when I refused to shut up, my dad tried to yell at me and shut me down, but my grandparents were there to remind him that this was not going to work anymore. After a bit of arguing, he finally had to leave because my grandparents threatened to call security on him and have him escorted out. They made it very clear to him that he was not going to receive anything until he acknowledged and accepted his mistakes, and even then it would take a lot for them to forgive him, and if I decided that I wanted to keep the inheritance for myself, he was not going to receive anything anyway. So he left like a child throwing a tantrum and promised that he was going to make sure that we paid the price for what we had done to him. I don't know what he thought he was doing. He probably thought that him behaving like that was going to scare us, but it really did not. It just made us even more sure that we were doing the right thing by not forgiving him, and he was not even sorry, so we can't even forgive him. I am glad that I'm leaving with my grandparents in a couple of days because I just want to get away from all of this now. I'm definitely going to miss my friends, but it doesn't matter anymore. I'm going to college in the fall, I've already graduated high school, and I'm just done with all of this now. Update 3. Hi, so it's been 1 year since I left home. For the past couple of months, I've been really busy with college, and that's why I was not able to post anything. I had pretty much forgotten about it anyway. After that fight with my dad in the hotel room that day, which I had mentioned in my last update, my grandparents and I left for the next few weeks. After that, we did not have any contact with my dad, but I definitely got to meet a lot of people from my father's side of the family who all love me, and I think this is the family that I had deserved all along. My mother had probably tried to love me, but she was too selfish, and in the end it hurt me more than it hurt her. My uncle has promised me that I don't have to worry about my college tuition. He's going to have it all covered, and that's been a huge relief to me. These people had barely known me for just a few weeks, but they had already decided that they were going to give me all the love that I had been missing out for these past 17 years, and I could not be more thankful for it. I couldn't spend much time with them because a few months after I had moved in with my grandparents I had to leave for college. But I do get to see them on weekends because the college that I'm attending is pretty close to where they are, so no complaints about that. My father has tried to reach out to me several times, not to apologize but to remind me that I have ruined him and that I should feel guilty about it, which is why I need to talk to my grandparents and make sure that he is not cut out of the inheritance at any cost. He keeps sending me emails and messages from different accounts, but he just doesn't seem to realize that getting defensive is not helping his case. The only thing that can help him is a genuine and sincere apology, but honestly at this point it's too little and too late. I'm just going to stick to ignoring him. Honestly, responding to him is simply not worth it, and I don't have that kind of time or energy to indulge his delusions. Anyway, I finally have the family that I deserve and I'm happy with them. I'm also enjoying my college life so far, so I'm going to focus on the positives in my life right now and try to forget about my past because I really just want to move on in life and do better for myself. Now on to the next story. Story 5. Controlling stepdad took over my late grandparents' bookstore instead of me, so I cut contact with my mom when she sided with him. Now she's begging for my help cause he failed high, so I 28F have been estranged from my parents for almost 7 years now. I cut ties with them after my grandpa passed away and my mother decided to let my stepdad take over the local bookstore that they ran. My father passed away when I was 3 years old from a sudden heart attack. Nobody had seen it coming, and everyone was left in shock when it happened. My father's parents cut ties with my mom soon after his demise, and she never saw them again. My grandparents took my mother and me in, and we lived with them for the first couple of years after my father's passing. She had been a stay-at-home mom ever since she gave birth to me, so it had been difficult for her to find a job. Even when she did find one, it was a low-paying position, and she had to work twice as hard to earn the same commission and bring home sufficient income. She could have run the bookstore with her parents, but she believed that it wouldn't have a great payout in the long run and was more of a hobby than an actual job anyway. She worked as a saleswoman for a stationery company, and in a couple of years, she had saved enough to get a place of her own. So when I was around 6 or maybe 7 years old, we moved out of my grandparents' house and into a place of our own. Up until then, it was just me and my mother because she was too focused on her work to divert her energy anywhere else. Besides, she still loved my dad way too much, and I would often catch her looking at photos of him and crying. But after we got a place of our own, she started dating other people. I'll admit it, I was a little upset about it at first because I thought that she was going to start putting me second. I don't know why I felt that way, maybe it was just a gut feeling, but I just felt like something bad was going to happen as she started dating other men. I used to think these things, but I never let it affect my behavior, and I was always nice to her boyfriends. I also didn't let my mother ever suspect that I felt a little weird about the number of boyfriends she would bring home. I'm a progressive woman myself, and I have had my share of flings and casual relationships, but I also think that if I had a child, I would probably think twice before bringing everybody home. I don't know why it never occurred to my mother. All I knew was that every other week there would be a different guy. I don't know exactly what she was trying to do, but I didn't have a good feeling about it. I stayed quiet about it because I didn't want to make my mother feel bad. She had worked really hard, and she had grieved enough, and also I was just a kid, so I didn't know how to express myself accurately without sounding like an idiot. So I just never said anything because I was scared of hurting my mom's feelings. Then when I was around 12 years old, she started dating Steven, and initially he seemed like a nice guy. He came over a couple of times and we got along well. I was nice to me, he was nice to me, and that was it. I expected, just like other relationships, this would probably also not last for more than a couple of weeks, and it would fizzle out soon enough. But surprisingly, months passed, and they continued to see each other. He would come over more often once they started getting serious, and occasionally he would even have dinner and spend the night at our place. Naturally, I started interacting with him a little more. I realized that he was quite different from the guy that my mother used to date before. I liked the others, he also seemed serious about my mother. I liked that about him, but I also got a very strange vibe from him. After meeting him, my mother started changing certain things about herself, and I was pretty sure that it was for his sake. He had a very dominating and assertive kind of personality, and it's not necessarily a bad thing, but for some reason my mother was a little too submissive, and I had picked up on her weird behavior around him. Whenever he would come over, she would turn into a different person altogether, and it felt like I didn't even know who I was talking to. She would try her best to agree with him on everything, and it honestly felt like I was watching a smitten teenager trying to impress the senior at high school. It was weird, and any time I would be around them, I would feel like I was intruding on something very personal, even if they were just sitting around and doing nothing. I had never seen my mother that way, even with the other guys that she had dated before this. She seemed to like them, sure, but she never put in a real effort to change herself and make herself more likable or whatever. But she did that with Steven, and I didn't feel good about it. But again, I was just a kid at the time, and even though I had sensed that something was off, I couldn't exactly bring it up and talk to her about it. She was my mother, and there were certain things that I couldn't talk to her about simply because they were inappropriate for a 12-year-old to say. So once again, I chose to not say anything about it and kept my mouth shut. Even when my grandparents would come around, I would never bring up her strange behavior around her new boyfriend. They did ask me a couple of times about how they were getting along and if I liked him or not, and I always gave them answers that I knew my mother would approve of. After dating for about a year, Steven moved in with us, and that's when things really started changing around the house. For instance, he changed all the decorations around our house and made them more gender neutral, as he himself put it. Now it would have made sense if all the decorations in our house were pink, frilly, and feminine, but that was not the case. It was already pretty neutral, in my opinion. We had done up our place pretty normally like everyone else, but for some reason that seemed to be very hyper-feminine to him, and he came along and changed everything about our house and made it all hyper-masculine instead. By the time we were done redecorating our house, it literally looked like a bachelor pad. He was quite impressed with it and said that it finally reminded him of home. I don't understand how that was a good thing, because before that he used to live with a bunch of roommates who were younger than him. I wanted to complain about it, but I didn't because my mother told me not to, and my room had remained untouched, so it was okay. But then slowly he started changing other things as well. He got my mother to stop eating meat because he had somewhere it was not good for the body, and he didn't want my mother to gain weight and become unhealthy in the future. So both of them switched to being vegetarian, and they tried to get me to switch as well. Thankfully, I was actually at school, and I told him that I needed the protein to keep up, so they didn't force me much. I wouldn't say it was a bad change, but my mother had been the biggest fan of hamburgers and all things meat before she met Steven, so it was a huge sacrifice that she was making. He also forced her to go off of sugar, and that made her immensely cranky, which is not good for me because she would never get mad at him but would snap at me for the smallest things. There were also a lot of other healthy lifestyle changes that he incorporated into their life, but honestly, it was all just random stuff that he would read on the internet and make everyone paranoid about it by building it up in his own head. He was a really weird man, but my mom seemed to like him, and as long as he was happy, I didn't want to say anything about it. Besides, it was not like he was forcing me to do anything, so I was cool with it. Then they got married. In a couple of months after their marriage, my mother announced that she was planning to quit her job because she was pregnant again. I thought that was great news, and I was excited about having a little sibling, but at the same time, I didn't think that quitting her job would be the best move. The kind of control that Steven seemed to have on her was really suspicious, and even though nothing bad had come out of it yet, I didn't think it was safe for my mother to just quit her job and completely rely on her husband. I tried to convince her several times not to quit her job, but she told me that it was none of my business and that since I was a child, I should stick to doing things that kids do and not poke my nose where it doesn't belong. So after a while, I stopped trying to talk to her about these things and decided that she was a grown woman, and she knew what was best for her so she could do whatever she wanted to. I was also sick of her telling me to stay out of things that didn't concern me because I don't think she realized that the things that she did definitely concerned me because I was a part of the family as well. I was probably 15 or maybe 16 at the time, so it wasn't exactly as if I was a kid either. Anyway, I decided to stay out of it and mind my own business, but unfortunately, my mother lost the baby maybe around 3 months into the pregnancy. It was devastating for her, and as a family we took it hard. She was in her late 30s at the time, so the doctors said that the complications had happened because of her advanced age. Stephen was extremely disappointed, and there was a phase in their marriage after my mother lost her baby where two of them were sleeping in different rooms and were barely even speaking to each other. It was really sad because my mother was already going through something really upsetting, and to add to that, the one person that she should have been able to count on wasn't even talking to her. Apparently, he had told her that he needed some space to get his head on straight and process everything. So for a few months, they were basically just flatmates because they barely even talked about anything that didn't qualify as a household emergency. They would just discuss bills and groceries, and that's about it. During that time, my mother really opened up to me, and it helped me reconnect with her, which is what made everything much worse when she finally forced me to cut her off. When Stephen wasn't speaking to her, she had reached out to me and my grandparents, and we were the ones who were there for her. My grandmother has also fallen sick around the time that my mother lost her baby, and that was also probably part of the reason that she had started reconnecting with us. A couple of months later, my grandmother passed away, and a few weeks after the funeral, Stephen started putting in an effort into making my mom feel better again, so they started rebuilding their relationship. But I had already lost faith in the guy. I started disliking him because he had really lost my respect when he started giving my mother the cold shoulder after she lost the baby. I thought that it was a really low thing to do, and after that, I didn't ever consider trying to fix our relationship either. During the time that he was ignoring my mother, he also started giving me the cold shoulder, and he and I had even left to talk about more than he did with my mother, so we were practically not even on speaking terms at the time. But anyway, after my grandmother's passing, he started trying to fix his relationship with my mother. But by then I had already made up my mind about him, and I knew that I didn't like him and I did not trust him. About a year after that, I left for college, and Stephen and my mother had started marriage counseling by that time, and they were doing great. On the weekends, I would try to visit them and would divide my time between my mother and my grandpa. My grandpa was really lonely after my grandma passed away, so I thought that it was really important for me to keep in touch with him. He was handling the bookstore business alone, and I had started thinking that after I graduated from college, I would start working at the bookstore and handle their finances or whatever, but I never got the opportunity to do so because a few weeks before my graduation, I received news from my mother that my grandfather had passed away in his sleep. I was glad that he had passed away peacefully, but I was also kind of upset that I didn't get a chance to say one last goodbye. To add to that, on the day of the funeral, my mother told me that his lawyer, who happened to be the executive of his will, had informally told her that she was going to inherit the bookstore business. I guess my grandpa hadn't changed his will before he passed on, and I was apparently going to inherit the house that my grandparents had lived in and I had spent the majority of my childhood, because even after I had moved out of that house with my mother, we would still frequently visit them. I was happy that I was going to inherit the house, and I knew that my mother didn't have any interest in running a bookstore, so I was planning on asking her to let me take over instead because I thought that it would be a nice starting point for me. And it wasn't even as though the bookstore business was doing too badly because it would still get customers and the place wasn't doing decent. A couple of weeks after the funeral, after the will had been read out, I decided to speak to my mother about it, but instead, she told me that she had already spoken to Stephen and he had said that he was going to take over instead. I thought that was majorly unfair because even though legally my grandpa had left the bookstore to her, I still felt like she should have allowed me to run the business. I tried to tell her that I had a special bond with my grandparents, and when my grandpa was alone after grandma had passed away, I had been helping him run the bookstore anyway, so I knew the finances, and I felt like it would have been fair for me to at least be a 50-50 partner in the business with Stephen if that's really what my mother wanted. But she was very stubborn and told me that she had already promised Stephen that she was going to let him take over the business and he was going to turn it into a franchise and take it to new heights, so I needed to stay out of his way. Truth be told, I didn't think that Stephen had it in him. Also, we were one of the exceptionally lucky bookstores that were still doing well in this era, so the idea of expanding the business seemed a little far-fetched and unachievable just yet. I thought that it would be better to start small and improve the one location that we did have. We had a lot of arguments about this, But a couple of days later, my mother told me that her decision was final and no amount of arguing was going to change her mind, so I needed to give up because apparently I was getting on her last nerve. She told me that she knew her own parents, and they would want the same thing that Stephen wanted, so I needed to stay out of this because apparently I didn't know the situation as well as she did. She told me that Stephen had already been having a hard time at his workplace and had been thinking about quitting for quite some time now. He finally had the opportunity to do it with something to fall back on, and she told me that I was not going to take it away from him. She told me to drop all ideas of trying to take away the business from him, and if I couldn't do that, I could just leave them alone since I was already a grown-up and I could handle life on my own. That was a really nasty thing to say to me, especially to defend Stephen. My mother and I got into a really bad fight, and since that day we hadn't spoken. I left the house that day, and after I graduated, I never heard from her or texted her ever again. She had made it very clear that either I would be okay with Stephen running the bookstore business or I could leave, so I had chosen to leave and I was sticking to it. 7 years have passed since then and a lot of things have changed. I graduated, moved into my own apartment, and got my first job. I also started seeing my boyfriend Dean a couple of years ago. Life has been good, and I don't mind the way things turned out. Of course, I would really miss my mother occasionally, but then I would remember what she said to me the day that I left, and I would stop thinking about her. I would like to say that I had forgotten about my mom completely and I had healed from everything, but that's not really the way it turned out. I didn't mind the fact that she wasn't speaking to me, but I couldn't help but feel like she was choosing Stephen over me. Deep down, I had always known that if it came down to it, she would always pick Stephen over me. I guess I had just hoped that I would be wrong, and when I wasn't, that shattered any illusions about my mother and effectively ended our relationship. I didn't even have my grandparents around anymore, so I had no reason to keep in touch with her. 7 years passed with zero news of her or how she was doing. Since now I live in a different part of the city and we didn't have overlapping circles anyway, and I had already told my relatives that I didn't want to hear anything about her. I just wasn't interested because it would only hurt me. So to sum it up, I didn't know a thing about anything that my mother had been up to in the past 7 years ever since I cut her off. But then a couple of weeks ago, I finally heard from one of my cousins that my mother had been asking around for my phone number and address, as she wanted to know if it was okay if she told my mother where I was living, so she could come to visit me. I found it a little odd, but then again, I had changed numbers after I left and I had blocked her on all forms of social media, so this was the only way that she could get to me. After some deliberation, I told my cousin that I was okay with it because, to be honest, I really wanted to know what it was that my mother wanted to speak to me about after so long. So I told her to go ahead and give her my address. A day after that, she visited me, and she came to me alone. I was a little surprised to see that Stephen hadn't accompanied her. But then again, we had never been that close, so it wasn't crazy. My mother and I had a tearful reconciliation, and after that we got to talking. I told her all about my life, and I introduced her to Dean as well. She kept asking me about my job and how I was doing financially, which I thought was a little weird, but I didn't think much of it because it was natural for a mother to want to know how her kid was doing. The only thing that felt a bit off about it was the fact that we hadn't been in touch for almost 7 years, and all she wanted to know was about how well I was getting paid at my job. She probably could tell that I wasn't struggling because I had a nice lifestyle which was reflected in the way I had done up my home. So in spite of that, when she kept asking me subtle questions, I started to think that maybe there was something going on and maybe she had ulterior motives to come visit me. And after a while, she finally dropped the bomb on me and let go of any pretense that she had come over to fix things with me. She told me that she was glad to hear that I was doing great money-wise because she really needed my help. She told me that the bookstore business wasn't doing too well, and Stephen was struggling to keep the business afloat. His great ideas of expanding and becoming a franchise hadn't really worked out for him because now he had multiple locations, but none of them were selling, and he had also taken a bunch of money from friends and family which he now had to return. He had also put all their money into the business, but there were no returns, so they were struggling to even be able to pay their own bills. They couldn't even imagine what would happen if their friends and family started asking them to return the money that they had borrowed. They were in really bad trouble financially, so they wanted me to bail them out. My mother told me that she had come to see me because she wanted to talk to me about this, and while talking to me, she had already deduced that I made a decent income and I would be able to help them at least a little. As if that wasn't embarrassing enough, She then proceeded to point at my boyfriend and said that since he was going to become a part of the family anyway, even Dean could contribute and help them keep the family business. I don't know why my mother thought that I was going to help her out like that, but the second that I realized that she had come here only for help and not to apologize, I decided to tell her that she could leave because I wasn't interested. Just to be clear, had he come to me with the intention of actually fixing things between us and making up for all the time that we had lost, maybe I would have even considered helping her out, but she only wanted my money, and the fact that she had dragged Dean into this as well, that just didn't sit right with me. So I decided to tell her to leave, and we got into another fight. She called me selfish and ungrateful and said that she regretted even trying to reach out to me, and I didn't hold back either and let out all of my frustration from when I was a child. After she left, Dean literally had to help me calm down for almost an hour because I had gotten worked up. I also found it really annoying that only my mother had shown up to ask for help when it was actually Steven who had screwed everything up. I was just really pissed off about a lot of things, and that's why I refused to help them. My mother and I had had a strained and bad relationship ever since she got married to Steven, and it had come to a breaking point almost 7 years ago, and recently I thought things were going to get better, but they didn't, and my disappointment and anger got the better of me, which is why I turned my mother away. She didn't speak to me again until a couple of days ago. I had also forgotten about the whole episode until she called me a few days back and told me that now they had no other option but to give up the business and sell everything because they were really struggling with money, and they had also told everyone who they had borrowed money from that the business wasn't doing well, and everybody wanted their money back. She made it sound like it was all my fault and told me that had I just helped her out that day, not even for her sake but for my grandparents, then this day wouldn't have come, but now they don't have anything left to give anymore, and selling is the only option that they had left. I know that I shouldn't feel guilty, but I do, and I don't know, I just feel like I've let my grandparents down. I know how much that bookstore business meant to them, and God knows it the same to me as well. So knowing that it's going to slip right out of our hands just isn't an easy fact to deal with. I could do something now, but I feel like my mother and Steven haven't ordered it and I don't want to go back on my word, but I also don't want to let the business go because then I would feel like a total jerk, so Ida for not bailing my parents out because the business that they had taken over instead of me wasn't doing too well. Update 1. Hi, so first off, thank you all so much for the comments on my post. I have thought about it and I have decided that I'm not going to help my mother directly, but like you all said, I really didn't want to let my parents screw up my grandparents' legacy. They had put a lot of hard work at something of their own, and I wasn't going to allow my parents to mess that up. So I decided to get in touch with a friend of mine, and together we decided to buy them out. I'm not going to screw my mother out of a fair price, and my friend is pretty rich since he has a restaurant business that he inherited from his father a couple of months ago. They have also been looking to expand, and they think that a bookstore plus cafe would be a perfect idea. So they're buying my parents out, and since I had approached him with this idea, I'm going to be their partner. The only thing that's left to do now is to speak to my mom. I'm just hoping that she hasn't found any other buyers yet because that would complicate things. It seems unlikely though since it's just been a few weeks. I'm guessing nothing has been finalized yet anyway. I'm keeping my fingers crossed and hoping for the best. Update 2. So it's been 2 days since my last update, and half an hour ago I just got off a phone call with my mother. I told her all about the idea that my friend and I had, and I mentioned to her that this would be a purely business deal and that's it. I was speaking to her in a professional capacity, and she actually seemed open to the idea. She told me that she would talk to Steven and let us know. So I think this is going to happen now. It's really exciting because I had always wanted something like this, and now I think it's actually going to materialize. Dean and I are already celebrating. Update 3. Okay, so it's been a couple of weeks since the last post here, but I've been really busy because my mother and Steven agreed to our deal. They got their way out of the business, and now my friend and I have already taken over. There is a lot of renovation to be done, and we are overlooking all of it. It's a long way until we find the start making money off of this, but I'm hopeful. I know that my grandparents are going to be proud of me, and I just have this feeling that this is all going to work out for the best. I can't explain it, but I just know it. Now all I need is everybody's blessings. Thank you so much to everybody who was there all along with me. Thank you for all the lovely comments and the messages. It really means the world to me. Now on to the next story. Story 6. Husband accused me of cheating with his brother and demanded a paternity test for our newborn. So I kicked him out and filed for divorce. So, I, 29 female, just gave birth about 3 weeks ago, and my son and I are currently living with my in-laws because of a horrible fight with my husband, Michael, 32 male. Michael said that he wanted me to get a paternity test 2 weeks after our son was born because he suspected that the child was his brother's. For context, his brother Brian, 29, and I went to college together. Brian and I have been great friends ever since the first day of college, and accidentally, it was through Brian that I met my husband. So, I can't understand why he's so insecure all of a sudden. My parents live in Iowa, and we went to college in Buffalo. Brian lived nearby, and he once invited me home because I had been feeling very homesick in my first year. That's how I met Michael for the first time. Michael and I exchanged numbers, but we didn't start talking until after I graduated college. We became friends, and after that we started dating. After being in a relationship for almost 4 years, we got married 3 years back, and so far, everything has been perfect. We were great together, and Brian and I were still really close as friends. The three of us often hung out together in a group, and Michael had never had a problem with it. It was only after I entered the 8th month of my pregnancy that Michael started acting weird around us. He started distancing himself from me and spending more time at work. I chalked it up to him being nervous about the baby and tried to fix the situation by trying to tell him that he would be a great father and that he had nothing to be nervous about. However, even that didn't seem to help, so I decided to focus on my health until the baby was born. I believed that after our baby was born, he would start acting normal again, but that didn't happen. He refused to spend any time with our son and always made up some excuse not to be around us. He would spend most of his day at work, and when he came back, he would tell me that he was too tired to be with the baby. I tried to put up with it, but when his behavior didn't change even after 2 weeks, I decided to confront him about it. One day when he came back home from work, I sat him down and told him that I needed to talk to him about his strange behavior. He tried to convince me that he was just tired from work and stuff and that this had nothing to do with me or the baby, but I didn't buy it. I voiced my concerns and told him that if he didn't speak up and tell me what his problem was, then I wouldn't be able to stay with him anymore because it was really hurting me to have him ignore us like this. So then, he finally told me that he didn't believe that the baby was his and he suspected that I'd been having an affair with Brian and the child was actually his. So now, he wanted me to get a paternity test for our son. He had no reason to accuse me of something so serious because I had never treated Brian as anything more than a good friend. So it felt like a slap on the face when he said that he wanted a paternity test. I started screaming at him almost immediately because I had already been feeling emotionally unstable thanks to all the post-pregnancy hormones, and that combined with his strange behavior around us had pushed me to the edge. His accusing me of having an affair with his brother was the last thing that I needed. When I started yelling at him, he told me that this was exactly what he had expected, which is why he hadn't brought it up so far and tried to walk out of the room, but that was really big and I wasn't going to let him drop a bomb on me and then walk away, so I demanded an explanation. He then told me that several weeks ago when I had invited a few of my college friends to our house for dinner, he'd overheard a conversation between Brian and another friend who had stayed with him. Apparently, the two of them had been talking about how everyone had expected me to end up with Brian because we seemed to get along so well, and Brian had just laughed it off instead of saying something to defend Michael. I didn't even understand what he wanted Brian to defend him from because it wasn't as if saying that everyone had expected him to end up with me was an attack on Michael. Somehow, it isn't odd for people in college to think that friends of opposite genders might get together in the future, and they were just gabbing about the past. It was harmless and fun, but ultimately it meant nothing because Brian was my friend and Michael was my husband. That should have been enough for him to feel secure, but he took that too hard, and he began to believe that maybe Brian and I did have a thing going on. That's why he had been acting so strange ever since the day of the dinner party. He was suspecting me of having an affair with his brother and being disloyal to him over a conversation that I wasn't even a part of. It was insane, and I tried to explain to him that he sounded really stupid, but it didn't matter to him, and he said that now that everything was out in the open, he wouldn't talk to me until I got a paternity test done and he knew for sure that the baby was his. Under normal circumstances, I never would have had an issue with a paternity test, but this just seemed ridiculously stupid. I couldn't believe that he was accusing me of cheating on him with his brother even after being with me for so long. I was really angry and upset, so I decided to take our son and leave the house. He didn't even try to stop me as I left, but I soon realized that I had messed up because I had nowhere to go. I didn't want to go to any friend's house because then I would have to explain to them what happened, and this was just very personal. I would have gone to Brian's place, but that would just reinforce what Michael already believed, and I didn't think that it was appropriate under these circumstances anyway. With nobody else to turn to, I decided to go to his parents' house since I was sure that I could count on them. They seemed to like me, and they were my best bet after Brian. So the day that I left, after wandering around for a bit, I headed to my in-laws' house, and they gladly took me in. When I explained to them why Michael and I had been fighting, they seemed really embarrassed and apologized to me on his behalf, but they also told me that it was really out of character for Michael to be so insecure, especially when it came to Brian, because the two of them had always been close and never had the kind of crazy sibling rivalry that others do. And I agreed it really was out of character for Michael to be insecure about his brother. The three of us were a tight-knit group, and that's how it had always been. So this sudden change in Michael's behavior made no sense to any of us. Nonetheless, his parents told me that I was free to live with them for as long as I wanted to, and they would respect whatever decision I made regarding my relationship with their son. They told me that even if I decided to get divorced, they would support me, but in the meantime, they would do their best to make Michael apologize to me and actually mean it. They kept trying to talk sense into him for a while, but on the third day, they informed me that they had decided to cut him off until he stopped acting like an idiot. This would be a problem for him because his parents were supposed to let him take over their family-owned textile business in a few months. His parents were retiring, and he had been in the running to inherit their business, but if they cut him off, Brian would end up inheriting it, and since he had no interest in running a business, he would probably sell it off, but then Michael would get nothing out of it. But the truth was that my in-laws only wanted him to reconsider what he was asking of me and accusing me of scaring him into thinking that he was going to lose the business. They didn't really have any intention of letting the business go to Brian because they knew that he would sell it, and they had worked hard to build a brand for themselves. They were obviously not going to throw it all away over my fight with Michael. They told me that they were just going to let Michael think that they were cutting him off for good, and eventually he would come around and apologize to me. Then we could sort things out between the two of us, be it by getting back together or getting divorced. Their only goal was to make him apologize to me and talk things through with me, and I appreciated that they were doing so much for me because I had nobody else to count on. I couldn't tell any of my friends, and I definitely couldn't talk to Brian about any of this because this had a lot to do with him, so Michael's parents were the only ones keeping me sane. After his parents told him that they were going to cut him off, we expected him to reach out to me immediately to sort things out, but he waited for a day before contacting me. When he called me 2 days ago, I expected him to apologize to me, but as soon as I picked up the call, he started screaming at me and accusing me of trying to manipulate his parents into giving Brian control of the business so that the two of us could benefit from it because apparently he was my lover now. I could hear his voice cracking and knew that he had been crying, which made me feel terribly guilty. He told me that he knew what I was trying to do, and he couldn't believe that I was cheating him out of a business as well as his baby. He called me heartless and whatnot before I finally told him that his parents were not going to give the business to Brian. They were just trying to scare him into thinking exactly that so he would contact me and talk to me. He went silent for a while after I told him that, and then he said that I was just evil incarnate. He said that he couldn't believe that now I was even trying to turn his parents against him just because he had valid concerns about the true paternity of the baby that he was supposed to be raising for the rest of his life. It was infuriating to hear him talk about how valid his concerns were when in reality his only concern stemmed from a stupid conversation that he had overheard. I tried to argue with him, but he told me that instead of wasting both our time by fighting, I could just do the right thing and get a paternity test. He accused me of being manipulative to get my way and told me to keep his parents out of this. I just feel helpless and have no idea what to do anymore. AITA for not wanting to get a paternity test? Date 1. I decided not to go through with the paternity test and instead filed for divorce. It's been one crazy week since the last update, and so much has happened that I don't even know where to start. But first things first, thank you so much for all the comments and the advice. Now coming to why I have decided to get a divorce from Michael. After that last phone call with him, I confided in his parents and told them that their plan to scare him into apologizing and sorting things out with me had backfired miserably, and now things were even worse than before. I also told them how he had accused me of manipulating them, but they reassured me that they were happy to have me because I was the mother of their grandchild, and even apart from that, they had known me for the longest time, and they loved me because I was a part of their family, and since I lived away from my parents for Michael's sake, it was their duty to take care of me and look out for me when I was going through a rough patch. Hearing his parents say such nice things about me made me feel less lonely and more of myself. So after talking to them, I decided to tell my parents and Brian about the situation because my in-laws didn't want their opinion to be the only one that I was taking into consideration, since other people might have a better idea of how to go ahead. When I told my parents about what Michael had said, they told me that they would support me regardless of what decision I made. The only reason nobody was telling me to leave Michael, despite how obviously wrong he was because of our son. I hate to say it about my son, but having a child with Michael is really complicated because I had to think about our kid's future before I made any decision. And then I had the most difficult conversation of them all when I spoke to Brian about what was going on. When I told Brian about what his brother had accused me of and asked him about the conversation that he had overheard, he started looking really uncomfortable, and I realized that both of them knew more than what they were letting on. So I pushed Brian and forced him to tell me what he knew because I was sure that he was hiding something from me, and so was Michael, since people don't just start suspecting their wife over something so petty. A lot of you in the comments had also suggested that there might be something that Michael was hiding from me because it just didn't add up that after years of being okay with my friendship with his brother, he was suddenly not fine with it out of the blue. There had to be more to the story that he wasn't letting me know. But I had been too caught up thinking about the consequences of whatever was going on at the time, as well as looking after my son, to really consider things like this. But yes, Brian told me the truth, and now I hate both brothers because I couldn't even imagine people could be capable of being this stupid and heartless. Apparently, when Michael had overheard the conversation, he had also heard what happened after Brian left. Brian had said to that friend that even he had expected that the two of us would get together after college, but life had other plans and his brother got in the way. So Michael was actually mad about that, not just because Brian laughed it off, and that made a lot more sense because Michael's version seemed a little too petty and incomplete to me. And the reason I didn't find out about it until now was because Michael had promised his brother that he wasn't going to tell me what he heard that day. Brian had been discussing this with his friend in the backyard, and he hadn't seen Michael standing around, but as soon as he heard what Brian had said, Michael went up to him and confronted him about it. That friend went back into the house, but even he didn't tell me anything later on, which I can forgive because he and I are not as close as I am to the others. Obviously, when Michael confronted Brian and asked him what he had meant when he said that he had expected me to get with him after college, Brian ended up confessing that he had feelings for me and had been waiting for us to graduate so he could ask me out because he knew that I had a strict no-dating policy until I graduated, but I ended up getting together with Michael instead, and that had been his first heartbreak. But he dealt with it somehow and tried not to let it show because he wanted us to be happy, and I have to say he did a pretty good job because for so many years I never had a clue that he had feelings for me, and neither did Michael. Brian was the one who begged Michael not to tell me about it because that would ruin our friendship, and he didn't want that to happen. So Michael stayed true to his word and didn't tell me about what Brian had said that day, but Michael still had second thoughts about me and my relationship with Brian and began to suspect me. He knew that even if we did have a thing together, asking Brian would lead nowhere because he would just lie to him and get away with it. My guess is that he started getting paranoid after the day of the party, but since he had already promised Brian that he wouldn't bring it up with me, he just started distancing himself from us altogether, and over time the paranoia just got worse, which is why he started accusing me of absurd things and demanding a paternity test for no reason. I'm guessing at what happened, but I don't know what exactly was going on in Michael's mind for the past couple of weeks, ever since he found out about Brian and his feelings towards me. Regardless of what he was thinking, it was ridiculous of him, and I was not going to stand for it. It made no sense to me that he would rather cover for his brother than just talk to me and clear the air with all of us. It's actually crazy, and I can't think of one rational, logical explanation for any of this. Getting a divorce was the only option that I had because it had become very clear to me that there was no going back from here. I'm not talking to Brian anymore, but I'm still living with his parents who have been kind enough to let me stay with them and even get me a lawyer because it's their kids who got me into this mess, and they feel responsible for everything that's happening to me. They have been really supportive and helpful, and I couldn't be more thankful that I have such great in-laws. People like this are truly rare to come by. I have filed for a divorce, and soon enough Michael will be served. He and I haven't spoken since that phone call where he told me that getting a paternity test is the only way out of this. I guess he hadn't counted on me to file for divorce because I hadn't brought it up since at the time I still believed that we could work past this. But that was stupid of me. There is no way we can work this out. He is being insane right now, and I don't think that's the kind of energy that I need around me as a new mom still struggling to adjust to life with a baby. If he would rather cover for his brother and make me the bad guy by suspecting me of cheating on him with Brian instead of just doing the normal thing and talking about it, then I don't think he deserves to be a husband or a father. He can stick to being a good brother and a good son. I'll handle the rest since our family doesn't mean as much to him as the one he was born into. Update 2. Hi guys, so Michael was served with the divorce papers today, and he didn't see it coming. I have no clue why he called me and asked me if I was really going to separate from him rather than just taking the easy way out and getting a paternity test done. So I told him that I knew exactly why he was upset because I had spoken to Brian and he had told me the truth. I told him that he was acting insane by covering for Brian instead of being transparent with me and telling me exactly why he was suspecting me. He replied saying that he had promised Brian that he wouldn't tell me because that would ruin our friendship, and when I asked him if keeping that promise was worth ruining our marriage, he said that it was because apparently he believed that he owed this to Brian, but he couldn't just shake off the feeling that something was going on between us. He said that he couldn't talk to Brian about it since he didn't think he'd get the truth from him because the guy had been hiding his feelings from everyone for so long. It was unlikely that he would be honest now, and neither could he talk to me since he had made a promise, so he started overthinking stuff, and that's how he ended up having a total meltdown on the day that I confronted him and demanded a paternity test to confirm if the baby was his. He said that my reaction just made him feel worse, and he started believing that I actually had been having an affair because if I didn't have anything to hide, then I would just have got the paternity test done. I tried to explain to him that this wasn't about me wanting to hide the truth, but rather because of how insulting it was to me that he didn't trust me and was suspecting me of something so awful. Even though I had already filed for divorce, I tried to explain to him that keeping that promise to his brother and not being honest with me had cost him his marriage and the chance of having a happy family. He was also not even speaking to Brian anymore, so what was the point of all of that? But Michael was not ready to listen to sense and kept insisting that this was somehow my fault for not getting that test done when I still had time. He said that I should have been more understanding because he was in a tough position that I didn't even know of at the time, and he couldn't bring himself to ruin Brian's friendship with me because that was his brother, and neither could he live with the fact that there might have been something brewing between Brian and me and the child might not be even his. He said that I should have realized there was a lot going on and at least tried to alleviate his worries by getting the paternity test done instead of making such a huge deal about it. It was an extremely frustrating conversation, and after a while, I gave up trying to make him see my side of things. He was clearly too hung up on his own insane anxieties to consider that maybe even other people had feelings and he had deeply hurt mine. To him, some promise that he made to his brother was far more important than his wife and child, and yet he suspected this same brother to be the father of his kid. It didn't even make sense. And even while I'm typing this out, I feel like I'm going to cry because of how ridiculous this situation is. If I'm being honest, I think there might be something wrong with Michael because I can't think of any sane human being acting out like this. If I was in his place and I suspected that Brian had feelings for me, I would never have made any promises because my family would be my #1 priority, and by family I don't mean my brother but the family that I chose for myself, my wife and my son. And even if I did promise my brother that I wouldn't ruin his relationship with my wife, I still wouldn't let myself go crazy and end up accusing my wife of cheating on me just because I was insecure. The fact that he wanted a paternity test only because he suspected me completely based on his feelings with nothing to substantiate his fears is what makes it even worse. Even today, the conversation that we had was completely based on what he was feeling at the moment, and he didn't even seem to care that this marriage had 2 people in it and a divorce was going to affect both of us, not just him. He also didn't ask about our son and how he was doing, which was very upsetting because when all of this is over, my son might not have a father figure in his life through no fault of his own. It's these 2 brothers who messed up, and for some reason, the universe is punishing me and my son for it. It isn't fair, and most of it doesn't even make sense really, but it is what it is. My parents are flying down in a couple of days to meet me because things are getting really awful. Michael's parents are still not speaking to either of their sons, and they have started to consider cutting both of them off permanently because they find all of this incredibly disappointing. They're considering letting one of their employees take over the business instead of Michael. I definitely think they should cut Michael off, but I don't know about Brian. He hasn't done anything terrible, he was just honest with Michael for once, and Michael was the one who let it get to his head and messed up his marriage. That's not on Brian, but it's his parents' decision, and I'm not going to interfere there. I'm just grateful that they are standing up for me. It might have something to do with the fact that they do want to see their grandson after the divorce, but regardless of everything, I still love and respect them because they have gone above and beyond in their attempts to make life easier for me right now. I don't think I would have been able to stand up for myself and file for divorce had it not been for them. It's crazy how supportive they are even when it's their own son that they have to go up against. Update 3. Michael isn't contesting the divorce, and he also doesn't want custody of our son regardless of paternity. So that's what's happening right now. I'm not surprised, but I'm still quite disappointed. But at least I have an explanation for his behavior now. He reached out to his parents a few days back and told them that he had been to see a psychologist a few weeks ago, around 3 days after I moved out. They did a complete psychological evaluation and medical exam, and he had been diagnosed with a severe anxiety disorder very recently. It had taken several sessions with the doctors, but they had finally concluded that this is what was going on with him. It was shocking news for all of us because he had never exhibited any symptoms of mental illness before, so this had to be a very recent development, or maybe he had and we had all just missed it. There's been a lot of revelations about Michael and Brian in the past couple of weeks, so right now I'm inclined to believe that maybe I didn't know these people as well as I thought I did. Regardless of the medical condition, I still think that I have no reason to forgive him because he hasn't apologized to me. His mental state can be an explanation for his behavior at best, but not an excuse to do whatever he pleases and say whatever he wants to. He didn't even have the courtesy to inform me himself. He told his parents, and that's how I got to know. Apparently, he has also been fired from his job for not showing up for 1 week straight after I left, and he needs money to cover rent, which is another reason why he contacted his parents. I thought he might be lying about the anxiety disorder, but he had all the legitimate medical documents to prove it, so I guess it's real and this is happening. In a way, I think it's for the best if he doesn't get to be with me or see his son for a while, not until he's better at least. The divorce proceedings are about to begin in a couple of days. My parents are already here, and we're all living together in my in-laws' house who have been gracious enough to open their home even to my parents. I just pray that everything falls into place soon, and I can regain some sense of normalcy in my life now. Now on to the next story. Story 7. Husband's entitled daughter demanded 50% of our house to move in after her divorce. I refused and kicked her out. Now she's turned the whole family against me. So, I, 44F, have been married to my husband, 50M, for about a year now. He has been married before and has a 26-year-old daughter from his previous marriage, Katie. My husband raised Katie on his own because her mother had passed away shortly after her birth due to pre-existing medical conditions that had been exacerbated by the pregnancy. She couldn't make it, unfortunately, and my husband had to do it all on his own. Now, you would expect that it would make Katie a little more grateful for what she had, right? Well, that's not how it worked at all with her, and instead, she became a really selfish, bratty monster who nobody liked. My husband tried his best to make her a good person, but unfortunately, Katie had her grandmother in her corner. My mother-in-law, Pamela, also played a huge role in raising Katie and spoiled her to bits. She was the textbook overbearing and grandmother who would do anything for her granddaughter, regardless of whether it was good for her in the long run or not. So, I would honestly say that she was the one who was responsible for spoiling her and making her act like a total brat. Katie knows nothing about life, and yet, for some reason, she thinks she knows everything. I really tried my best to like Katie, but she was the one who made it almost impossible for me to get along with her. You see, she had made it up in her head that her father deserved better than me. So, when he brought me home to meet them all, she was not impressed, and neither was her grandmother. That was almost 3 years ago, and since then, nothing has changed. Sure enough, they could never say anything to my face, but I knew they didn't like me. It doesn't take a genius to figure that out because they pretty much gave it all away with their behavior around me. Lucky for me, I don't really care about whether people like me or not. I tried to be nice to her initially, but when I noticed that my efforts were going in vain, I stopped trying to be her friend. I had also tried to be nice to Pamela, but she also made it clear that she was never going to be accepting of me, and in her head, her son would always deserve somebody better. And who knows, maybe my husband can do better. I'm not saying I'm the best, but honestly, even if someone better did come along, they would probably drive her away with their psychotic and crazy behavior. And even apart from that, I was the one who my husband had decided to be with, and we were in love. The bare minimum that they could do was be respectful of that, but even that seems like an impossible task for them. Because about a year ago, when we announced our engagement, Katie and Pamela completely lost their minds and tried their best to break us apart. Of course, they did not succeed, and I highly doubt that they ever will. After we announced our engagement, Katie completely lost it and showed up at our house one day without notice. My husband and I were both at home that day, and she had a complete breakdown. She screamed at her father and said that he had no right to ruin their family like this by marrying someone like me. When I asked her what she meant by someone like me, she went down to elaborate and said that I was a woman of loose morals and character, and apparently I was just a gold digger, according to her. I don't even know where that was coming from because I was doing just fine financially before I even met my husband, and money was pretty much the last thing that I would want from a partner. I guess she thought that I was poor only because I didn't exactly have a typically high-paying job. For context, I am a self-employed artist, and I work on commission. I am self-taught, and I have been working ever since I graduated from college. I'll admit it was not easy in the beginning, but now I have carved a niche for myself, and I'm doing pretty great. I make a decent amount of money every month, and I would say that I'm comfortable, and I'm definitely doing well enough not to depend on a man for money. So, for her to even imply anything of the sort was disgusting and low, and I made it very clear to my husband that I could not remain in touch with him anymore. My husband also agreed that Katie had taken it way too far that day, and disliking me was one thing, but implying that I was a gold digger and that I used to hook up with men so that my lifestyle could be taken care of was a horrible thing to say about me. He decided to cut her off that day and also went low contact with Pamela. I would have demanded that he go no contact with her as well, but unfortunately Pamela is kind of old, and I couldn't in good conscience tell him to cut ties with his elderly mother. So, about a week after our engagement, my husband and I stopped speaking to Katie. He would still continue to visit his mother, but after that point it was only he who would visit her, and I wouldn't see her because I wanted nothing to do with them. They had already made it very obvious to me that they didn't want me around, so I was just doing my part and staying away from them. Neither of them had been invited to the wedding because we were already not on speaking terms with Katie, and Pamela had said that she would not want to attend the wedding if her granddaughter wasn't invited, so that settled things and neither of them attended the wedding. I was okay with it. My husband seemed upset for a little while, but then he seemed to get over it. That was almost a year ago, and about 2 months after our wedding, we heard from a couple of people that apparently Katie had gotten married in secret just a couple of months before we got married. She and her boyfriend from college got hitched in secret and announced it after our wedding. Of course, we had not been invited to the ceremony either, and it was just them and a couple of their close friends who were present there. My husband took it really hard because it was his only daughter who got married without him. She had not even tried to reach out to him, and that's what broke his heart. I felt really bad for him as well because had I been in his place, I probably would have felt the same way. After the news broke, he even reached out to her to congratulate her, but she never responded to that message. He told me that he was happy for her because he knew that the guy that she had married would keep her happy. We would only get to know about her and what she was up to from other people. Apparently, they had bought a house together and were quite happy. My husband told me that he would maintain his distance, and honestly, if Katie had reached out to us then, I would have been willing to forgive her for everything, but she didn't. And it was just about a week ago when I received a call from my mother-in-law, and I learned that Katie and her husband were getting a divorce. That was shocking because it had been just a year since their marriage, and apparently, the divorce had been in the works for the past 3 months and a little more. Now that the waiting period was over, since we live in Colorado, the divorce had been finalized, and unfortunately for Katie, her husband had taken the house. It was fair, honestly, because she was the one who had cheated on him. Apparently, she didn't think that emotional cheating counted as anything, and that had been her entire defense. She had been exchanging messages with a guy from work and had confessed that she had feelings for him. But apparently, she believed that since she had never acted upon it, it shouldn't have been held against her. These are not even my words. This is what she said to us. It was appalling that at her age, she could be that stupid and ruin her own marriage like that. But there was also the fact that she had nowhere to go since her ex had taken over the house, and she had lost a lot of her money in the divorce. She was already a pretty big spendthrift and was not one for saving money. She was very financially irresponsible, so it was no big surprise that getting a divorce and having to handle all her expenses on her own had pretty much driven her to bankruptcy. She told us that she would not be able to afford rent for a couple of months, and she wanted to save up her money before she moved out, so she needed us to help her out and let her live with us. This conversation took place a couple of weeks ago around the time that Pamela had called to inform me of the divorce and had asked my husband and I to come over so we could speak to Katie in person after the divorce, which she had told nobody about. She had moved out of the house and had been living with Pamela for a couple of days. But the commute from her house to Katie's workplace was becoming increasingly difficult and time-consuming. Our home, however, was a lot closer, and that's why Katie wanted to fix a relationship with us and move in. That day at Pamela's house, Katie told us that she really was sorry about the way that she had behaved. She confessed that she had a bit of an ego problem and couldn't handle the fact that I was my own person and wasn't bending over backward to cater to her needs like she had been used to all her life. Throughout her childhood, Pamela and my husband had made sure that her needs were always met, and she never had a lack of anything in her life. They made the impossible possible for her, so she had learned to have really unrealistic and crazy expectations from life in general. And after becoming an adult, she realized that that's not really how the world works. So now, after her divorce, she had come to realize that not everybody was going to be as forgiving as a family, and she had to make her peace with that. She told us that she was already really depressed because in spite of whatever she did, she really loved her ex, and it was really hard to accept the fact that she had lost him because of her own stupidity. She said that she didn't want to lose her family as well and wanted to do right by us, which is why she wanted us to give her one chance to make everything all right again. We didn't know what to say that day because she had put us on the spot. So, I told her that I needed some type of thing because of the things that she had said about the way that she had behaved with me, but something that I couldn't just move on so easily from. And even now, she was only approaching us because she needed something and not because she was actually sorry, even though she insisted that she meant her apology. But anyway, after some argument, we decided that we would take some time to think about it and then let her know. Until then, she could continue to work from home since she had already spoken to her employer about it. My husband and I were really in a dilemma and had no idea what to do. We had decided that we would at least try to build some sort of a normal relationship before we let her move in with us because that would be a huge deal. So, we kept in touch for a few weeks before we came to a conclusion, and in those few weeks, Katie was on her best behavior and was trying to impress me and take back everything I have to say. For a couple of days, I really thought that she had started to change. She was being really nice to me, and after a couple of weeks had passed, when she asked me again if I was willing to let her move in with us now, I said yes. I had already discussed it with my husband, and he was open to the idea anyway. He was just waiting for me to come around. So, when I finally did come around, Katie was thrilled, and she even called me up to let me know that I would not regret this. And the next day, she showed up with all her bags and stuff. My husband and I had both taken a day off to welcome her and make sure that everything is all right, but before she had even set foot inside the house, she brought out a few documents and said that we needed to sign the paperwork before she moved in. We were really confused because we didn't think that any legal paperwork was required for an informal arrangement. When we went through the papers, my husband and I realized that she wanted a 50% claim on our property that we had purchased with our own money. This house that we were living in, my husband and I had bought when we first moved in together, and that was almost 2 years ago. Katie had nothing to do with that, and she had absolutely no contribution towards it, so I couldn't even imagine why she would think that we would simply agree to this. When I returned those papers to her and asked her what she meant by this, she told me very casually that she had her lawyer draw up a little something for her because she just wanted to make sure that she couldn't be kicked out of this house like she had been kicked out of her ex-husband's house. I was speechless when she said that, and my husband took over the conversation and told her that this wouldn't be necessary because this was not going to be a permanent arrangement anyway, so there was no need for her to involve legal paperwork in this. In fact, she herself claimed that this was not going to be a permanent thing, and she just needed she just needed to trust us. But Katie, like the true blue idiot that she is, decided to say the worst thing possible. She told my husband that she trusted him implicitly, but she wasn't very sure about me, and that was really the reason why she had believed that it was necessary for her to get this in writing. And she told us very firmly that she wouldn't be setting foot in our house unless we signed the documents. I was stunned, and before my husband could say anything, I decided that I would put an end to this. I told Katie as sweetly as I could that since she didn't trust me enough to live with me, she could find someplace else to live. Better yet, she could just go back to Pamela and live with her like she had been all these past few weeks. There was no need for her to stay with us. She was right about not being able to trust me. After my little speech, I slammed the door shut in her face. I expected my husband to say something about it, but even he didn't seem to care because he knew that Katie had crossed a line with me, and it was simply unacceptable. So we went back into the living room while Katie shouted at us from the outside and cried about how I was being unfair to her. But I didn't care about any of it because I was seething, and it took all that I had to not go out and smack some sense into her. After screaming at us for a little while, she left, and it was just me and my husband again. We didn't expect anything to happen that day, but we knew that there would be repercussions to this. We had expected Pamela to be really upset about this, and she was, which she let us know the very next day. She called up my husband and screamed at him for about an hour about how the two of us had insulted Katie and said that we needed to apologize to her and take her back. My husband argued with his mother for about an hour before he finally gave up trying and cut the call himself. He told me that he had blocked both of them, so there was no way that they could contact us again, but they found ways. They decided that they were going to make their relatives contact us instead. Now, my husband is not exactly close with his family because they are really weird and dramatic and he just doesn't mix well with them, but for some reason, all of them believe that it was their place to come talk to him about what had happened with Katie. Everyone's been texting us and saying that I overreacted and that I owe Katie a huge apology. To them, she's just a child who has been a little paranoid, and reasonably so, since she just got kicked out of her house by her ex-husband and can't bring herself to trust people easily again. Apparently, everyone thinks that we need to be more accommodating of her and her feelings instead of vilifying her for it. First of all, I don't even know how people are calling her a child because she is literally 26. I don't think that qualifies as a child in any way, shape, or form whatsoever. But sure, she is the victim here. And more importantly, I think everyone conveniently forgot the fact that she had been kicked out of the house because she had been cheating on her husband. Now, I don't know about other people, but to me, that sounds like a pretty fair reason to get kicked out. Things have been really difficult to deal with because everyone is hounding us, me especially, for kicking my stepdaughter out because she wanted to have 50% ownership of our house. Update 1. Hi, first of all, thank you so much for commenting on my original post and letting me know how much I am not a TA. I already knew that, but honestly, the way that my husband's family has been behaving would put anyone in a tizzy over it. Anyway, now that's clear, my husband and I decided to block everybody who had been texting us. It was a difficult process because there were a lot of people whom we had to remove from our lists, and people could refer to it as a mass blocking process of sorts. But yes, to sum it up, we have gotten rid of anyone and everyone who was trying to make us look like the villain just for standing up for ourselves. We can safely assume that Pamela and Katie are probably furious right now, but unfortunately, they have no way of contacting us, so we will never know for sure. After my post here, my husband and I had a serious discussion about this, and he told me that Katie had always been spoiled and entitled, but it had reached a level where even he couldn't handle it anymore despite being her father. He told me that he felt guilty for treating her like this since she was his only child, but I reassured him that if he gave in to all her demands, he would be no better than Pamela. He was actually doing her a favor by trying to mold her into a better person, and he should be proud of himself for that. I don't have any kids of my own, but I knew that if I had any, I would love for them to have a father like my husband. That seemed to pacify him a little, and now we are hoping that Katie takes the hint and tries to become a better person. Update 2. So, Katie decided to pay us a visit today. Thankfully, I was not at home at the time, and I only caught them when they were leaving. I had to finish up my work at the studio today, so I was a little late. When I pulled up, I noticed Katie and Pamela getting into her car, and they looked really upset. It was only after they left that I came out of my car and went inside the house. My husband was sitting on the couch and he also looked worked up, and I knew that there had been a fight. He was all red in the face, which only happens when he has been screaming about something, so I knew instantly that his mother and daughter must have said something to set him off. When I asked him what was going on, he told me that they had come to visit him under the pretext of fixing things with us. Apparently, they had contacted him from a different number when he was at work and said that they were waiting right outside our house. so he rushed back home from work to talk to them. And he expected them to apologize because that's what they had said they would do on the phone. But when he reached home and once they were inside, Katie started talking about how she was ready to forgive him even though he hadn't even apologized yet. But she was not okay with me being around anymore. She had said that she had apparently put up with me for long enough, but now I was overstepping, and I had no right to do so because I was not her real mother. So, she expected my husband to talk to me and acknowledge the fact that I had screwed up by insulting her when she came over the other day and apologized to her. When my husband told her that I was perfectly within reason to react the way that I did, she started to argue with him and said that he was only taking my side because he was too scared to stand up to me. She accused him of being a coward and said that she was ashamed of having a father like him who couldn't even stand up for his own flesh and blood. So that turned into a full-blown argument, and my husband informed her that she was in the wrong here, so she didn't exactly need anybody to stand up for her. And more importantly, she already had Pamela on her side, and her grandmother was going to support her no matter what she did, and no matter how messed up it all was. So, my husband also ended up saying that he was more ashamed than she was of having a horrible daughter like her. It was really sad because at that point, both Pamela and Katie started crying, and they insisted that apparently I was responsible for this behavior. They believed that I had turned him against them by poisoning him and making him believe that they were terrible people. They were trying their best to manipulate him with their tears, but it was not working because my husband had already seen these things before. He was impervious to them. They continued to cry for a little while, probably hoping that he would interject and say something or maybe apologize to them for hurting their feelings, but my husband didn't say a word and just continued to glare at them while they shed their crocodile tears. After almost 15 minutes of crying, Katie called my husband heartless and said that she couldn't believe that he was just going to let them cry and not even say anything about it to make them feel better. When my husband said that he knew what they were up to and said that these tactics were not going to work on him, she got even more offended and said that these were not tactics, but she was just genuinely upset that he, as a father, was refusing to take accountability for his behavior and make things right with her again. She blamed him entirely for allowing me to insult her, and she even played her mom card and said that apparently her mother would be disappointed in the way that he was treating his family now. Now, that's what set him off on a rampage, and he ended up saying everything that he had been bottling up for so many years. He called Katie the worst person ever and said that if her mother even had a clue as to what a horrible person she had turned out to be, she probably would have chosen to remain buried underground because nobody would want to have a daughter like her. I personally thought that was a little harsh, but honestly, the way that the two of them have been pushing my husband and backing him into a corner for the longest time, I'm surprised that he didn't snap earlier. Somebody with my patience probably would have cracked way before he did. I honestly think it's commendable that he was able to avoid this meltdown for so long, but it was long overdue, and it finally happened today just before I came back home. He had been yelling at Pamela for ruining his daughter, and he told her that now that she had finally made her into the awful kind of person that she wanted, she could take responsibility herself and keep him out of it. That's what they had been fighting about just before I came back home, and the two of them decided to leave because they had had enough, and honestly, so has my husband. I calmed him down after they left, and we got our finest bottle of wine to celebrate the fact that he had finally laid out all of his feelings and he wasn't going to have to deal with his drama in a long time. I think that's pretty celebration worthy. Update 3. Hi guys, it's been almost a year since I last posted here. And wow, I can't believe that's how different my life was back then. I just randomly thought of this account a couple of days ago, and it took me a while to remember the credentials, but I managed to log in today. So, a little update for you guys. Katie is still living with Pamela from what we know, and thankfully, they are staying far away from us. They did not try to contact us after that huge blow-up with my husband, and I am honestly very grateful for that. My husband and I had a pretty uneventful couple of months after that, but then we decided to adopt a dog. Having kids was out of the question for us obviously because I was really never interested in having children, and I think I'm at an age where my body would not be able to support a pregnancy either without endangering me. We did think about fostering a child or a teenager, but I honestly don't think that either of us is emotionally or mentally prepared for that yet. But a dog, yeah, that was perfect. Now, I know that we shouldn't compare kids to animals and pets and stuff like that, but honestly, ever since we rescued our 3-year-old golden retriever from the pound, life has changed for us. His name is Bob because we thought it was a funny name. He has brought us a lot of joy, and we are really grateful that he chose us as his parents. We post about him all the time, and the funniest thing is that a couple of days ago, a friend of mine told me that he follows Katie, and she had tweeted something about being replaced and stuff, and even though we can't prove it because she never mentioned a dog or anything, we were pretty sure that she was talking about Bob. To think that she was jealous of a dog was a hilarious thought, and I could barely stop laughing when I first heard about it. The saddest thing is that I think my husband probably would have forgiven her if she had just had the decency to apologize. I mean, of course, she is his only kid, and I know that it can't be easy for him to live life apart from his only daughter, but he has to do it, and I honestly think that it's Katie's fault. I just wish that she had apologized, and Pamela had actually forced her granddaughter to be a good person for once. But whatever. My husband and I are happy, and we spend our days with Bob. Life's good. Now on to the next story. Story 8. Ex-wife is fleeing the country with our kids and her fiancé to avoid his business debts. But I told her I'd fight for full custody unless she'd tell the truth to her boss, who is her dad. Hi, so I, 30F, have 2 children with my ex-wife. I'll call her Diane, 30F. Diane and I met when we were in college. We were in different departments, but our friends set us up because we had a lot of common interests. We went out on a couple of dates and found each other really interesting, so by the end of our 3rd semester, we were in a relationship. We got married about 3 months after our grand graduation and had our first child within a year of our marriage. At the time, both Diane and I were working, so our parents would take turns with our son, and that's how we made it work. But when our son turned 1 year old, Diane decided that she was going to quit her job to stay at home and raise our son. I didn't have a problem with it because he was really young, and I wanted him to have at least one parent to be around. Plus, our parents were also getting older, and I didn't feel comfortable constantly asking them to babysit. So, Diane and I decided that we were going to stick to this arrangement. She's going to stay at home and do all the household chores and raise our son, while I bring home the money and try to provide for a nice life. At the time, I wasn't earning much, but when Diane decided to quit her job, I decided that I was going to work much harder and get promoted so I would have more control over my hours and would be able to bring home more money. I thought it was a great idea, but the only downside was that I was spending a lot more time in the office than I was at home. Initially, I didn't think that it was going to be a problem because Diane had agreed to this. She was well aware of the fact that I was not bringing home enough money for the kind of lifestyle that we wanted in the long run, and if I wanted to get promoted, then I would just have to work harder. But for some reason, she started complaining that I would never be at home, and even when I would try to explain to her that I was working and spending more time in the office because I wanted to be able to provide for my family, she would just not be ready to listen. She started accusing me of never being at home and even started suspecting me of having an affair because she just couldn't believe that I was actually working for that long. She used to complain all the time I was not giving her enough attention, and I honestly thought it was just ridiculous. At one point, we could barely even have a conversation without having it turn into a full-blown fight. But then, a couple of weeks after my son's 3rd birthday, Diane told me that she was pregnant again. We were really happy because even though it would put more financial strain on me, I was just happy to be a father again. That pregnancy was harder on Diane, and it put a lot of pressure on our marriage, but we made it through, and we didn't separate until our younger daughter had turned 3. I tried my very best to make our marriage work, but I just couldn't because I don't think Diane tried hard enough. She had pretty much given up on us during her 2nd pregnancy, and that's what hurt the most. Things had become really bad for us because Diane and I were happy parents, but we were not happy to be with each other. The kind of relationship that we had back in our college days was nowhere to be found. It honestly just felt like all the love had just evaporated into thin air one day, and all that was left with us was bitterness and anger. Even when she was pregnant with her 2nd child, she would treat me like a stranger. I didn't even have the option of slowing down at work because I knew that I couldn't risk it. I absolutely had to put in my time, especially because I had heard from a few of my seniors that they were actually considering promoting me even though I was one of the youngest employees there. It was my hard work and consistency that was going to pay off, and I couldn't let myself slack off because I had to look after my kids, and I wouldn't be able to afford to give them a good life if I didn't even have the kind of money that I needed for it. I desperately needed Diane to understand it, but I don't know, she just wasn't ready to accept certain things. I guess she had expected that even after kids we would be able to maintain the kind of life that we had before. She wasn't okay with the kind of responsibilities that we had as parents now. Life wasn't going to be easy breezy anymore, and I just don't think that Diane was ready to come to terms with that, and she took that out on me by blaming me for not giving her or the kids enough time. Maybe not giving enough time to her, I can still agree, but I can never agree with the fact that I didn't give the kids enough time. I was always there for them, and all the time that I would spend at home after work and on the weekends was dedicated to my children. After our daughter was born, I think Diane slowly started losing interest in making the marriage work. I suggested marriage counseling, but she said that we shouldn't waste money, so instead, I started organizing date nights and stuff, but even then she would just not seem interested and would be cranky and mean all the time. We were still fighting constantly, and I honestly felt like she was trying to back me into a corner so that I would file for divorce or something, and she could leave me without the guilt of knowing that she was breaking apart our family. I don't know, it must have been something messed up like that, but what I do know for a fact is that she was really pushing me away, and after our daughter's birth she had given up. A couple of weeks before our daughter's 3rd birthday, we were planning on throwing a party, and I don't even remember what we were fighting about, but I think Diane and I were unable to agree on the color scheme or something stupid like that. I don't remember what exactly, and even that turned into a huge fight, and she started bringing up weird things like how I seemed to love the kids more than her and that apparently I had forgotten about my marriage altogether. I didn't think that it was fair, so I brought up the fact that she had been refusing to attend marriage counseling, and she was the one who was refusing to give our relationship a chance. And so somewhere in the blame game, I think it probably clicked in her head that this was not working anymore, and she just left. I'm not even kidding. Right in the middle of the fight while I was trying to talk to her, she left. She didn't even pack anything. She just walked out of the door and got into the car and drove away. I didn't hear from her for the next couple of days, even though I was trying to contact her desperately. I went to her parents' house, and I also knocked on every friend's door, but I couldn't find her. I only heard from her after about a week when she came back to serve me the divorce papers personally. There was no conversation because when I saw those papers, I knew that it was over and there was no going back from this anymore. We had tried our very best, or at least I had. I didn't have anything left in me to give any more to this relationship, and I couldn't drive myself crazy trying to fix our marriage because I still had 2 kids to think about, and honestly, our kids deserved better. They did not deserve 2 parents who were fighting all the time and couldn't even bring themselves to agree on something as stupid as a color scheme for a birthday party. So we decided to end it mutually, and I signed the divorce papers without much of a fuss. And then there was the whole custody arrangement and stuff, which was pretty easy because both of us wanted shared custody, and we worked out something for ourselves. It was a relatively peaceful divorce because by the time it was actually happening, both of us had accepted that this marriage was not going to work, and that acceptance was what made things a lot easier to handle. I kept the house and one of our cars, she took whatever belonged to her, and that was it. The divorce came through about 3 years ago, and we have had quite a peaceful co-parenting arrangement since then. I wouldn't say that we are friends, but we are on good terms, or at least we were until a couple of weeks ago. Our kids spent half the month with me and the other half with Diane. They are happy and so are we. However, about a month ago, Diane invited me to lunch at a nearby restaurant and dropped a bomb on me and told me that she was seeing somebody. And not only were they seeing each other, she was engaged. It was a lot of information to process because, first of all, I didn't even know that she was dating somebody. This was the first relationship that either of us had after our divorce, and she didn't bother to let me know, but at least a heads up would have been nice. However, before I even had enough time to come to terms with that, she told me that she was engaged to be married and that she was going to move away with him. This guy, let's call him Alex, is a couple of years older than us, and from what I know, he handles his dad's company. They are about to set up their business as well, and so Alex decided to propose to Diane, and she agreed, so in a couple of months they are scheduled to move to Canada. Now, this obviously causes a huge problem because I live here and so do our kids, and co-parenting was easy so far because Diane only lived a few blocks away, but Canada was a different story. I was really shocked when she told me all of this because she let it all out in one go, and I was not prepared for any of it. It was a shock that she was seeing somebody, add to that the fact that she was engaged to this person and was about to move away with him. At first, I thought that she was going to tell me that she was giving up the shared custody arrangement and maybe the kids could come to see her during the holidays or whatever, but instead, she said something even more ridiculous. She told me that now, if I wanted to be able to see my kids, I would have to uproot my life and move with her. I honestly thought that she was joking until she told me that she wasn't, and she actually expected me to leave everything behind and move along with her and her new husband because she was not going to give up custody of the kids. I was stunned that she was even expecting me to entertain this ridiculous idea, and I really had no clue what to say to her at that moment. I was really about to lose my temper, but instead, I decided to play it cool because we were in a public setting, and I didn't want to make a scene. So instead of yelling at her, I decided to think about it rationally and asked her a couple of questions about this Alex guy, and I am honestly so glad that I did because otherwise they might have really screwed me over. When I asked her how long they had been together, I expected her to say at least a year or so, but instead, she told me that they had been together for just 6 months and hadn't even lived together. Not only that, but the kids hadn't even met this guy, and she expected me to allow them to take off with him and go live in Canada. When I told her that 6 months was not enough to give up the life that she had built for herself here and moreover expect her children and ex-husband to do the same for her, she laughed in my face and said that I was only saying that because I had never really experienced the kind of love that Alex and she shared. It was really difficult for me not to roll my eyes and shake her at the time because it was honestly the most stupid thing I have ever heard. I don't know any other woman who would leave their life behind and expect their husband to do the same just because she thought she was in love with some guy she had met just 6 months ago. To make matters worse, she told me that Alex had just broken up with his long-term girlfriend of almost 6 years just 2 months before he met Diane. Apparently, they had been at a bar, and that's where Alex had bought her a drink and asked her out. She had found him really cute, and they had struck up a conversation. After that, they had gone out several more times together, and by their third date, Diane had made up her mind that she was in love with this guy, and he also seemed to be really into her. So when he told her about his move to Canada and asked her to marry him, she didn't hesitate before saying yes. It might have been romantic in a novel or a movie or something, but this was real life. She had 2 children to think about and also an ex-husband to take into consideration. So as much as I appreciate the notion of romance and love at first sight or whatever, I didn't think it was such a good idea for her to get married to Alex and move to Canada with the kids. After listening to her story, I told her as much, so she would not be surprised when I refused to give up my life here to move to Canada with her. When I told her that I would not be moving to Canada with her, neither would I be allowing our kids to move with her, and that she should seriously reconsider all of this, she flipped out at me. She told me that I was just jealous that she was finally happy and doing better than I was, which is why I wanted to jeopardize it and sabotage her life. We were about to get into a fight at the restaurant, but I held back and told her to think about what she was saying and then get back to me later on. I was sure that this was just some stupid midlife crisis or whatever that she was having, and she would come around eventually. But a week passed, and she still didn't acknowledge the fact that she was being a little too hasty in making these decisions and they were probably not in the best interests of the family. I expected her to come around after a week, but then when I called her up to ask about her decision, she told me that she had thought about everything, and she knew what she was doing. She said that she was sure about Alex, and she knew that she was doing the right thing by agreeing to marry him and taking the kids with her. She gave me an ultimatum and said that I could either move with her, and her fiancé would help me find a job there, or we could do things the hard way and we could go to court. I'm sure that she expected me to back down and agree to her demands, but this was just weird, so I told her that I was ready to let this go to court, and then I hung up on her. I spoke to my lawyer immediately after the phone call and filled him in on whatever was going on. He had already proved himself to be a pro at his job because he was the one who helped me during my divorce and my first custody case, and now that we were about to renegotiate this, I could count on nobody else but him. So we did our research and found out that Alex was the heir and a partner in his father's business. They came from a pretty wealthy industrialist family, and it's probably why Diane was so confident about everything. I guess she thought she could just buy her way out of this or something. They were pretty powerful and influential, so it was no big surprise that Diane felt that way, but no matter what it was, I was going to make sure that my kids were not taken away from me. So we really did a lot of digging and found out every little thing about Alex and his family and his relationship with Diane just to be on the safe side, and well, let's just say that we found out a lot of not so nice things about them. Also, we spoke to a couple of business associates who had been dealing with Alex in the past and realized that he actually owed them a lot of money. They thought that we were calling them on his behalf, and also some of them didn't hold back and let us know that he had conducted business deals with them behind his father's back and off the record, and that's why they had been refraining from taking it up legally yet. But a lot of people had a lot of complaints against him, and I figured that he was moving to Canada to escape from all of this because he didn't want his dad to find out how he had been destroying his father's legacy. And Diane had 100% been a part of this because we found out that they had not met at a bar like she had originally told me. I spoke to a couple of my friends who had kept in touch with her, and they told me that they had met at work. Apparently, the alimony was not enough for her to live on, and so she decided to take a job as a secretary. She had been working for Alex's father, and that's how they met. So it was very easy for me to put two and two together and come to the conclusion that they had been trying to get away from all of this by escaping to Canada, and they expected me to just let them get away with it. I'm pretty sure that Diane didn't even stop to consider what kind of impact this would have on our lives, talking about me and the kids. I was furious when I found out about all of this, and I decided that I was going to file for full custody anyway. She had told me that she was moving away. I knew that I would be left with no other option eventually unless she by some miracle decided to change her mind or whatever, but finding out about all of this, I had made up my mind, and I knew that filing for full custody would be the right thing to do. Besides, I did not want my kids to have anything to do with her anymore because now I knew that she was dishonest and was willing to screw over people for her own gain. So, my lawyer and I filed for full custody of the kids a couple of weeks ago, and I decided that I would not want her to have unsupervised visitation rights. She could only see the kids when I would allow her to be present there at all times as long as she was around them. After all these lies, I don't think anybody in their right mind would be able to trust Diane again. She had clearly lost her mind and was willing to go to any length to cover up for a man that she hadn't even known for that long. I honestly believe that she got involved with him because of the money at first, and I'm sure that he still has a lot of money to his name, which is why she is choosing to stay with him and go through so much. That Diane loves her parents, and I can't imagine any reason why she would leave them behind, but money can be a pretty good motivating factor. Anyway, I'm not sure about it, and it's a theory that I've been floating by. In reality, I still have no idea why she's with him despite knowing that he was a dishonest man. Maybe she actually loves him, but putting your family at stake, that's not cool. After my lawyer and I filed for full custody, I received a call from Diane a couple of days after that when she was served. Of course, she was quite unhappy with the arrangement and claimed that I was being unfair. She was really upset. I remember that she had been screaming at me about how I was a jealous and unhappy man, and that's why I was trying to take away her happiness by sabotaging her relationship with our kids. Thankfully, it was my turn to have the children with me, so I was not afraid of anything because I knew that she wouldn't be able to take them and go anywhere with them. I was able to speak my mind freely, and I told her that I knew everything about the scam that they had been trying to pull off. I informed her that I had spoken to a couple of his business associates, and they had not held back. Maybe it was unprofessional of them, but it worked in my favor, and honestly, there is nothing more unprofessional than owing people money and then taking off to avoid paying them back. That's when Diane seemed to calm down because she knew that I was aware of the truth, and I could very well use it against her in court. Not only would that get her in trouble, but it would also stir up a lot of trouble for her fiancé. So she had to tread lightly with me, and she knew it. So she started trying to request me to keep this quiet and said that we could still work out an arrangement where she would be able to meet the kids occasionally. But that was not enough for me. I did not want her or Alex involved with the kids in any capacity because what they were trying to do was dangerous and illegal. They were bound to get caught in it one day, and I did not want my children to be a part of that. So, I set forth a condition and told her that if she came clean to her boss, Alex's father, and promised me that they would not be running away to Canada or trying to get away with this scam, only then would I consider letting her have even visiting rights. I thought that it was fair, and honestly, it was more than what she deserved. She could play it safe, and I was giving her the opportunity to do the right thing even if it was just for the sake of her own children. I thought that it would be enough, but she turned it around on me and claimed that I was blackmailing her. I don't understand how it was blackmail because I don't stand to gain anything from this. If anything, I'm trying to help her out right now because at some point in the past, she and I were really close, and I would hate for her to end up behind bars, which is exactly where she would be headed if she went through with Alex's plan. She claims that if she and Alex come clean to his father and tell him the truth about all the deals that they had conducted behind his back, he might be fired from the company, and his dad might cut all ties with him. She tried to explain to me that Alex was just trying to start something of his own, and his dad didn't think that it was a good idea just yet, but he couldn't wait, so he went behind his father's back to conduct deals, and the investment turned out to be a bust. But now they couldn't even tell his father about it because he would know that they went behind his back and screwed things up for him. That would spell trouble for them, and she wouldn't be able to take care of the kids anyway, so getting custody would be pointless. On the other hand, if she went through with his plan, escaped to Canada, and left her future father-in-law to deal with all the trouble here, she would lose custody, but at least she would be able to buy herself and Alex sometime. To be honest, I don't really see the dilemma here, and I think the choice is very clear, but she thinks I'm a horrible person for putting her in a position like this and says that the condition that I have set for her is a diabolical one because she's going to lose something either way. I don't think it's that unfair because she really should have seen this coming when she decided to go along with Alex and screw over her own boss. I'm still getting her a chance to clear her conscience and at least visitation rights to her own children. But even then, she thinks I'm the bad guy, and honestly, I have even started to think that I might not be in the right here because this is not my business, and I have no right poking my nose where it doesn't belong. My lawyer thinks that our best bet is to continue with the custody case and try to make her give up custody because that's easier, but I really don't know what to do anymore. Ita for telling my ex-wife that I will not give her visiting rights if she doesn't come clean to her boss and her future father-in-law about this scam that she and his son had been pulling off behind his back. Update 1. Hi! It's been about 3 weeks since I posted here, and a lot of things have happened. After a lot of arguing, begging, and bargaining, I was able to convince Diane that she needed to tell Alex's father the truth. There was just no other way out of this, and the more she tried to fight it, the deeper she would sink. If we are being really honest, her plan of taking off to Canada and trying to escape this while leaving Alex's father to deal with the mess was a bad one anyway, and there was no way that it would have worked. I actually did her a favor by putting her in that position where she had to make a tough call, and I guess she was able to come to her senses and realize that she was being an idiot. So she made the right call, and she convinced Alex to tell his father the truth. She let me know later on that, in a shocking turn of events, his father actually forgave him and said that he understood that Alex had screwed up, so now he would still have a job, but he was being made to step down as a partner, and his father was not going to retire anytime soon. That's pretty much the short version of things. The custody battle is still ongoing, but I think that as of now, I might continue with shared custody. I think I'm going to have to cancel the proceedings because one thing is clear: our kids love their mother just as much as they love me. In the past few weeks, both of them have been driving me crazy and keep asking me when they will be allowed to see their mother again. Even Diane has been requesting me to call off the full custody arrangement because she did as I asked her and even apologized for losing her head in the crisis that she and Alex had been facing. So I guess my best bet will be to let this thing go. Update 2. Okay, I did it. My lawyer and I decided that we were not going to push for full custody anymore, but just to be on the safe side, we decided that Diane would only get the kids for 1 week every month. And with time, if everything goes well, we might go back to the usual 2 weeks that we have been doing so far. She is thanking me for it, but things are really cold between us, and I don't think we can ever go back to being friends or whatever. We are not on good terms. I'm guessing that it's going to be this way for a while, but it's all right. I'm fine with it. I did what needed to be done, and I have no regrets. Update 3. Hi, just a short update. It's been about a year since the whole fiasco with Diane. She and I are not in touch anymore apart from anything that has to do with the kids. I would not say that we are on good terms, but yeah, whatever. I heard that she and Alex got married in a private ceremony a couple of weeks ago, and I wish them nothing but the best. I have also been seeing someone for the past few months, and it's going really well so far. Everything is peaceful, and the kids are happy, which is more than what I could ask for. We have reached the end. If you enjoyed this video, please be sure to like and subscribe to the channel for more videos like this, and give us your thoughts about the stories in the comments section. Thank you and see you in the next video.